we ready?
Lights
Everybody
are on.
ready? Okay. I'd like to call the Monday, May 6, 2019 Oakwood City Council meeting to order. Would you please rise and join me with the pledge to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a roll call, please, Lori?
Mayor Duncan?
Here.
Vice Mayor Byington?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mrs. Hilton?
Here.
Mr. Epley?
Here.
And may I have a report on our April 1 regular session and work session and our April 22 work session and executive session? Council Member Hilton.
Yes, Your Honor. I've reviewed the minutes from all 4 meetings, and I found them to be correct and complete, and therefore I move that they be adopted as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So ordered. Next is status reports. We have no citizen committee appointments. We expect to have some at our June meeting, so we will have that on the agenda for next month as well. And I do have a proclamation that I would like to read. Whereas each year in the state of Ohio, the underground utility infrastructure is jeopardized by unintentional damage by those who fail to have underground facilities located prior to digging, resulting in possible service interruptions, damage to the environment, personal injury, and even death. And whereas in an effort to reduce these damages, Ohio 811 has partnered with the Common Ground Alliance to promote the national Call Before You Dig number 811, as well as the use of safe digging practices. Whereas designated by the Federal Communications Commission in 2005, 811 provides potential excavators and homeowners a simple number to reach their local one call center and request utility line locations at the intended dig site. Whereas by following safe site digging practices, excavators and homeowners can save time and money by making a simple call to 811 in advance of any digging project, waiting the required amount of time for the utility to be located, respecting the location marks by maintaining visual definition throughout the excavation, and digging with care around the marks. Whereas through educational efforts, Ohioans can save time and money, keeping our state safe and connected by making a simple call to 811 in advance of any digging projects. Now therefore be it resolved that I, William D. Duncan, Mayor of the City of Oakwood, encourage Ohioans to call 811 before starting a project that requires digging, and provide the month of April 2019 as Safe Digging Month. We tried to pass this last month, but we sort of forgot. So, but Safe Digging Month is not just in the month of April, it's all year round.
That's
so,
correct.
Thank you. We now have the visitors section of our meeting. We plan on having a public hearing regarding our sign ordinance. So if anyone wants to speak to council regarding the sign ordinance, I would ask them to wait until we get to that part in the agenda. But if you have anything else that you wish to address council on, this would be the time for you to come up and address council, and you can state your name and address for the record, and we would welcome you. Welcome.
Thank you. Matthew Curry, 263 Ridgewood. And I was reading a copy of the Drinking Water Consumer Confidence Report that was released April 12th, and noticed that it referenced that the city sometimes buys drinking water from the city of Dayton. And I went to the city of Dayton's Drinking Water Report, and it talks about, since 2014, the city's been testing for PFAS, which are per and polyfluorochlorine substances. And I noticed in this Oakwood's report that I didn't see that the city of Oakwood was testing for those. So I'm just kind of curious how I can find more information out about what the city of Oakwood is testing for, and if we are indeed testing for these PFAS substances.
Okay. It's I'll let the city manager address that, but it's my understanding that while we have an arrangement to be able to buy water from Dayton if we have a shortage, we have not purchased water from Dayton for several years. But do you want anything you'd like to add to that?
That's correct, Your Honor. We basically produce all of our own water. But in terms of your question on who to talk to, Gary Dersch at the Public Works Center, 2980777 would be the person to talk to. I mean, he's our water superintendent, takes care of all the EPA compliance and all the testing.
Okay, this is contact in here
Yes.
somewhere? Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
Gary's the person.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address council on any other matters related to, other than our sign ordinance? All right. That will close the visitor section of our meeting. We will go to legislation, and Mr. Stevens has an ordinance he would like to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor Duncan. An ordinance levying special assessments for the improvement of certain streets between certain termini in the city of Oakwood, Ohio by lighting the same with electricity. This ordinance is the third step of our 2020 street lighting program and was introduced with a first reading at the April 1st council meeting. It allows for certain costs of street lighting to be certified to the Montgomery County Auditor for assessment. This is the second reading of this ordinance, so I move that council adopt it this evening.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any other questions or discussion for Mr. Stevens? Hearing none, Lori, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Duncan?
Yes?
Vice Mayor Byington?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mrs. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Epley?
Yes.
And Vice Mayor Byington has an ordinance related to our 2020 tax budget.
Yes, Your Honor, this is an ordinance adopting the 2020 tax budget for the city of Oakwood for the fiscal year beginning January 2020. And this is to comply with section 6.01 of the city charter, which is an annual housekeeping ordinance to estimate the city's revenues and expenses for calendar year 2020. It was introduced as a first reading at the April council meeting, and at this point, since this is the second reading, I would move that council adopt it this evening.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments for Vice Mayor Byington? All right, we will actually approve our official budget at our December meeting. And again, this is a housekeeping matter because we haven't changed our charter since 1960, I don't believe. So with that, Lori, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Duncan?
Yes?
Vice Mayor Byington?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mrs. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Epley?
Yes.
All right, and Vice Mayor Byington also wants to introduce an ordinance regarding amendments to our sign regulations and our zoning code.
Yes, this is an ordinance to repeal existing Title 12 signs of the Oakwood zoning ordinance and to adopt a new Title 12 signs of the Oakwood zoning ordinance. This ordinance is to update the city's sign regulations, which have not been materially updated since the current zoning ordinance took effect in January 1 of 2001. The draft ordinance was prepared by the city attorney to accomplish three goals. First of those was to establish clear regulations for the use of electronic signage. Second was to ensure effective administration while remaining constitutional. And three, to add clarity and consistency throughout the sign code. As a text amendment to the zoning code, this ordinance is subject to a two-step approval process that requires public hearings before both the Planning Commission and City Council. The Planning Commission conducted its public hearing on March 6th. By a vote of 3-2, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the ordinance, but conditioned that recommendation on the removal of certain provisions from the draft. Those provisions included Section 1201.06C5, which permits electronic changeable copy to be used on certain monument signs. Also Section 1201.06D, which set forth regulations applicable to the monument signs displaying electronic changeable copy. And three, Section 1201.06F2, which requires all permanent signs to be constructed of non-combustible materials. I introduced this ordinance with a first reading in April at our council meeting, and tonight is the second reading of that second reading, and this is the public hearing that goes along with that. At this point, I think I'd turn it over to you for the actual public hearing portion.
Thank you. Our process will be, we'll have our law director, Rob Jacks, give a staff report, and then we will open up the public hearing for anyone who wishes to comment on this. Because it is a public hearing, anyone who wishes to testify, we will have a group swearing-in ceremony that, so if you decide you want to talk to council regarding this after Rob gives his presentation, we'll ask you to stand in place and he'll administer the oath to you. And then after we close the public hearing, council will deliberate and then vote on the measure. Rob, I will turn it over to you.
Bear with me for just a moment, if you would. A lot of materials to keep organized, and I'm afraid I'm going to end up spilling. Okay. Mayor, members of council, City Manager Klopsch, thank you for having me here tonight. What we're going to talk about are the sign regulations in our zoning code, and as Vice Mayor Byington pointed out, there's a text amendment that has been proposed that's subject to a two-step approvals process. This is the second of those two steps. The goals that we had in drafting this amendment to the zoning code are, first of all, to establish regulations for electronic changeable copy signs. They were barely touched on in our existing code, and as some of you know, the city applied for a permit for an electronic sign at the OCC earlier this year, and one of the main concerns that the Planning Commission had was that there were, in their estimation, insufficient guidelines in our code for them to really make a good informed decision on that. So we went and started drafting a new sign code to incorporate a more thorough regulatory scheme, and that's what's in front of you tonight. In doing that, we also tried to shift from content-based language, definitions, et cetera, to content-neutral regulations. And that's important when it comes to constitutional law. People have the right to free expression, the right of freedom of speech. I think we all learned that in school. But when it comes to operating in the real world, what courts have said is that if you have to read the sign to know how it's regulated, that's a content-based restriction that's going to get a much higher level of scrutiny than if it is content neutral. So we've tried to put content neutrality into our code wherever possible and to revise a lot of our definitions and wording to accomplish that. And then finally, we just did general updating as we needed to clarify the code. We've been using this current version of the code now since 2001. We have a sense of the things, those provisions that really aren't as clear as we would like them to be or need some additional clarification, and we've tried to go through and do all that. Council's role when you review a text amendment is to review it for consistency with the purposes of the zoning code, the comprehensive plan, and the interest of the city as a whole. That's wording that comes straight from our zoning code. So you're basically considering the best interest of the city along with those comprehensive planning documents in deciding if this makes sense or not. Council, it has come to you on a recommendation of approval or denial. Council will be approving or denying this, making the final decision. These are the kinds of areas, and I talked before about content neutrality. This is just a general list to give you an idea of the kinds of things that are considered content neutral, the things that where we can shape these codes and come up with provisions, anything that has to do with time, the hours of displaying something, the hours of darkness, frequency of the changing on a sign, et cetera. Anything involving time can be regulated in a content neutral manner. Anything with square footage, anything with height or width requirements, setbacks, anything dimensional. And if you look through the things on that list, you'll get a sense of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. What we can't do is we can't tell someone you can have a sign that says this, but you can't have a sign that says that. We can tell them where, how often they can display, but we can't tell them what it can say. Purpose that we have a sign code. I just want to review this quickly. The reason that we have rules in the first place are, first of all, to preserve the character of our distinct neighborhoods. You want to have residential activity and residential type signage in those residential districts. You want to have your commercial and your business signs in the business type districts. We want to promote the ease of locating and identifying buildings, cut down on motorist distraction and any kind of traffic safety hazards. Signage can also impact property values. You can imagine if you have a stretch of sign clutter, how that will drive down values. So we want to minimize sign clutter and help people keep their property values up, not have public nuisances around them. And we want to protect the public peace, health, safety, welfare, convenience, and comfort. Those are not just catch-all terms. That's what council is here to do on a daily basis, and so that's part of the reason why we have these as well. The challenge is, how do you do those purposes while you protect the rights that the public has to free expression? So that's what we have undertaken to do here. And this was a much harder endeavor than we envisioned, I think, when we got started on it. That picture there on the slide in front of you is just to give you an idea of all the varieties of types of signs that there are out there. A lot more than probably some people realize when you think of signs. Any kind of visual display can be a sign. And you'll see everything from pylon signs, pole signs, A-frames, monument signs, you name it. And our code, our existing code, calls out definitions for each and every one of these and specifies what makes it up. And if you look through those definitions, what you will find is the vast majority of them are not content neutral at all. They're content based. And I'll give you an example. We treat real estate signs differently than any other kind of temporary sign. If it has a real estate message on it, it's treated one way under the code. If it says, I'm having a garage sale, or, you know, vote for candidate X, you name it, that's treated differently. So we wanted to get away from having all these myriad sign types. Let me just kind of quickly go through a bunch of pictures, and I don't want to bore you, I want to move this quickly. But I just want to make sure that as we talk about signs, we're all using similar terminology, especially as we talk about these types. So I've pulled some examples wherever possible. I tried to get local examples. Some of these are not. But when we talk about temporary signs, we're talking about signs of a limited duration. It might be that there's an event like a grand opening. It might be a real estate sign that something's available for sale. It might be a political sign, but these are signs, you know, we stick them up in the yard for a period of time or hang them on the building for a period of time, and we take it down. Wall signs are like they sound. They're signs that are mounted on the wall, and there's an example from Dorothy Market and Kubik Fine Books. Ground or monument signs, under our current code, they're referred to as ground signs. You'll see in the draft that we've now shifted that to monument signs, and I'll touch on that later. But these are examples of what I mean by ground or monument signs. They're ground-based signs. Window signs are signs mounted in a window. A lot of these are sort of self-explanatory. Window signs can be in the form of a window display, like you see there at Blue Turtle Toys, or permanent window signs, like you see there on the Oakwood Florist, actually either etched or stuck onto the glass. Sometimes people use temporary window signs, like advertising a sale or the latest flavor of ice cream or sorbet at Grader's there. Awning signs over the front of businesses. Canopy signs. We don't have a lot of these in Oakwood. There's one behind the Oakwood Club that you can see in the photo there. I think the Chase Bank may also have one on the Far Hills side of the building. I'm not aware of any others here in Oakwood, but there are canopy signs. Then we get down into subtypes of signs based on how they function. Attention-getting devices like you see there. I tried to pick a couple of fun examples. Hopefully you'll never see those in Oakwood because we don't allow them here. Availability signs. Those are signs that say that something is available for purchase or available for rent, that sort of thing, and we've included some examples there. Banner signs. Well, it may be hard to see on the slide there, but there is a banner strung between the two windows on the brick face of that building there. Changeable copy signs. Now that's the sign that you see at Concordia Lutheran Church at the corner of Hathaway and Peach Orchard. That is a manual changeable copy sign, meaning someone has to walk out there and physically take the letters off, put new letters on to change the message on the sign. There are also electronic changeable copy signs, which we'll get to, but this is an example of a manual changeable copy sign. Directory signs, like you see there, often list, you know, a variety of tenants in the same business or building. Entry signs are used to designate the entry. Sometimes if there's a back entrance, they may have a separate entry sign back there. These are a couple examples from the Oakwood Florist. Home occupation signs. Now, I didn't find any local examples because we don't allow these in Oakwood. If you have a home-based occupation, that's a secondary use to your use of that property for residential purposes, so we don't allow you to have signage for that. But if we did, that's what a home occupation sign would look like. Identification signs, like the name suggests, they're there to identify a particular business or resident, I guess. Illuminated signs. These are examples of external illumination on signs. And generally we've required that if you're going to illuminate the sign, it can't be, you know, harsh light pointed out at the street. It's light that's shining back on the sign or uplighting, downlighting this way. It's meant to illuminate the text, but not to, you know, you don't want to shine 10,000 lumens out into the middle of Far Hills while people are driving by. Some signs do have internal illumination. That is prohibited under our current code, but there are a couple, and we found 3 examples here in Oakwood that are internally illuminated. Nameplate signs. You see these around. They're not as common maybe as they used to be, but sometimes people have the building has a name, or like the Wonderly apartment you see there, maybe named for the street that it's on. Those are nameplate signs. Off-premise signs, and we see these a lot in Oakwood. They're not allowed under our current code. Somebody's doing a roofing job on your house and they stick that sign in the lawn that says proudly done by Rob Jack's Roofing or whatever. We call them off-premise signs because they're advertising their business, which is located somewhere else. It's not a business that's located on those premises, and they're not permitted. Parking control signs, that's pretty self-explanatory. Pole signs. We have 3 of them here in town. Coincidentally or not coincidentally, they're the same 3 signs that were also the internally illuminated signs that you saw on an earlier slide. We'll get back to pole signs a little later. Projecting signs, and I was careful to select an example from Councilmember Stevens' business.
Very nice picture.
That's a projecting sign being a sign that sticks out perpendicular to the building that it's mounted on. We don't have many of those in Oakwood, but there's a couple examples. Roof signs, they're prohibited in Oakwood. I could come up with no examples in Oakwood, so I found a picture online. Actually, Ethan Kroger found this picture for me. Secondary signs, this is another picture of the Stevens Insurance Agency, and what I'm directing your attention to is the signage in the window as opposed to the projecting sign up top. The difference between primary and secondary signage is generally the primary sign is meant to be seen by vehicles passing by. Secondary signage is generally intended for pedestrians who may be walking by. So that's why you would have primary or secondary signage. So I want to talk a little bit about the structural changes that we made to the ordinance that you have in front of you. What I found is that our existing ordinance was just very cluttered, and a lot of things were not clear, a lot of references that kind of have you chasing all through the code. There were 36 functional types of signs defined in our existing code. Some of them they're defined, but they're not referenced anywhere else in the code. They just appear in the definition section. But we had 36 types. A lot of those definitions contradict themselves. We have very similar definitions for freestanding signs and ground signs, for example. The definition of pole sign could be, in fact, confusing with the freestanding and ground sign definitions. We wanted to try to simplify all this and make it easier for city staff to understand, make it easier for residents and businesses to understand. Inconsistent inclusion of dimensional requirements. There were parts of the code that would say if you have this type of sign, you can have 2 of them. If you have this type of sign, you can have 1 of them. Other parts of the code didn't include any numbers and left it kind of open-ended. There's not a lot of consistency through there. And then finally, we have what I call an over-reliance on the 97 Business District Design Guidelines. That is a document that was developed in 97. In fact, it was developed before our current zoning code, and it's separate from the zoning code. And I don't know this, I'm speculating, but I think the reason why we've relied on that in our current code is because it's an outside document that doesn't require amendment through the cumbersome process of going to the Planning Commission public hearing, to the council public hearing, et cetera. It was a document that could be more readily tweaked as needed. Unfortunately, if you read through that business district design guideline document, you don't find a lot of hard and fast, you shall do this, you shall not do that. You find a lot of shades of gray. You should do this. You might want to do that. Attention should be paid to that. It's very much worded in a suggestive rather than a mandatory way, and we wanted as much as possible for this to be clear and understandable. So we tried to take as many of the things that are set out in that separate document, as many things as possible. If we could take it out of that document and get it into the code, we've done that, and we've tried to incorporate that throughout. The proposed ordinance, compared to what I just told you about our existing one, the proposed ordinance breaks everything down to 4 very clear classifications. All your signs in Oakwood are either prohibited signs, exempt signs, temporary signs, or they're signs that would require a permit. We'll talk a little bit about those, but we're taking everything and breaking it down to 4 general classifications. Within those classifications, sign types are limited to just the ones that we see here in Oakwood that we have here in town. Wall signs, monument signs, window signs, awning or canopy signs, lawn signs, and projecting signs. We've eliminated, for example, we eliminated marquee signs. You picture movie theaters that have the signs with hundreds of naked light bulbs kind of drawing attention to it. Looks like you see outside a movie theater. We had that included in our code. We don't have one anywhere in town. And I'm not sure that we would want that on a, you know, if a business opens up in the middle of the business district, would you want a couple hundred lights displayed on their sign? Probably not. So we've deleted that as an unnecessary sign type. We've also set it up to regulate signs in what I'm calling a clear linear progression. We regulate them first by their classification, which is it prohibited, is it temporary, exempt, or does it require a permit? Which of those categories does it fall into? Then we regulate by district. You can do certain things in a business district that you can't do in a residential district, and vice versa. Then we've regulated the design characteristics by sign type. You're going to have different requirements for a ground-mounted sign than you are for a sign mounted up on a wall. That's where, you know, where the type determines how it's regulated. And then they're regulated by whether they are installed as a primary sign or a secondary sign, which I talked about previously. Let's talk about prohibited signs. And I know that the type is small on this. In part, that's intentional. This is a list of all the things that are prohibited under our current existing code, except for 2 items on there that have asterisks by them. And those are the only 2 things that we've added. What we have tried to do is bring over as many things from our existing code to the new one as possible, because we're not trying to just make wholesale change to how people live and how people work here in Oakwood. We are trying to make things clearer. We've brought forward as much as we could from the existing code because we want to reuse it. But we have added to it. And the 2 things that we've added to the prohibited list we didn't already have are signs on parked vehicles or trailers where the apparent purpose is to advertise, and signs that are untruthful and misleading. Other than that, we're not changing the list of what's prohibited from what you see in the current code. The classification of exempt signs. These are signs that are not regulated under the code other than to say that they're exempt from regulation in the code. And we've called out several of these. Safety or maintenance type signs, you know. Danger, there's a hole here. You don't have to have a permit for that, you can just put it up. Nameplate signs, those are frequently part of a building when it's constructed, or even added, sometimes added later, but we've decided not to regulate nameplates, as long as they're within certain size dimensions. You've got the draft there, and you can see that. Address signs, your house numbers that you have on your home. You don't have to have a permit for that. You don't have to get anybody's permission to change it. As long as it meets the requirements here in this exempt category, it is exempt. Governmental and regulatory signs, public information signs, like just signs that let people know there are phones here you can use, there are restrooms here that you can use, that sort of thing. Certain parking control signs are exempt. Governmental flags are exempt, meaning if you want to put a flag on a flagpole in your yard, you're welcome to do it. You don't have to have a permit to do that. I'd have to double check. I think that's as long as you have one. If you want to have a ring of 100 flags in your backyard, that would be a problem. But putting up a governmental flag, as long as you just have, I think, 1 or 2, is exempt. Memorial plaques and cornerstones would be exempt. My clicker doesn't seem to want to go. Laura, this is blinking at me. Does that mean something? Okay, well, let me grab my notes and I'll just continue from over here.
See if you, make sure the mic's working over there.
Testing.
Okay.
We good?
Yep.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to use the mouse pointer instead of the laser pointer if I need one for anything. What did we do? Did we get through the list? Memorial plaques and cornerstones? Yes. Next one. Safety and security signage, just your basic, you know, cameras in use, that kind of thing. We're not going to require people to get permits for that. Any information that would appear on gas pumps, and I realize we don't have gas pumps here in the city, but there are certain things that are required to be on there by law, and if someone were to open a gas station here in Oakwood, they would need to be able to put the, you know, the auditor sticker and that sort of thing on there. Same for vending machines or ATMs. There's information that they're required to put on there by law. Signs adjacent to entry doors, push, pull, open, close, those sorts of things are not regulated. If a business wants to put their hours of operation or what credit cards they accept, that kind of thing, we're not going to regulate that. We will not regulate temporary holiday or festival decor. And this was a learning exercise for me. I didn't realize that part of the cemetery over there on West Shantz is actually in Oakwood, and we have a cemetery zoning district devoted to that piece of the cemetery that's in Oakwood. We would exempt headstones and grave monuments there. We're not interested in getting into regulating those. So let's talk about temporary signage. For residential properties, residential uses, what this draft code says is that you would be able to have temporary window or lawn signs. Those are the types of temporary signs that are available there. And the size limitations that you see there are consistent with what we have in our existing code. One thing that's a change from that is the idea of window signs being deemed permanent after they've been in place for 45 days. We will, under this code, we will allow people to put a 6 square foot sign in one window, which 6 square feet might be the same size or even a little bit bigger than a typical political sign like someone might have in their front yard. After 45 days, though, it would become a permanent sign, and the allowable dimensions for permanent signs are a little smaller. The idea being, if you want to put it up there for a little while to show who you want to vote for, that's great. If it's going to be there long-term, year-round, it needs to be a little smaller. People still need to be able to see out the windows, light and ventilation, et cetera, and we don't want to just have all the windows blocked by these big signs. One other thing I want to call your attention to here. You see the words administrative variance there when it refers to lawn signs. And this is an important thing that we've added into our code that's not in the current code. What our code says now is you can have 12 square feet of temporary signage on your property. A lot of people think mistakenly that we say you can only have one political sign or only two. We do not regulate based on the number of signs that you have. We regulate based on the aggregate square footage. And within 12 square feet, let's say you could have 3, 4 political signs might fit within that 12 square feet without going over. But you may get the person who says, well, if I put these lawn signs in my yard where the city tells me I have to, people aren't going to be able to see it, and my voice isn't being heard. Courts are sympathetic to that argument. People do have a right to express their political beliefs and even to have them seen by their neighbors. So if somebody's got a visibility issue where if I put it in my yard in the only allowable spot, people can't see it, there is authority built into the ordinance that would allow city staff to grant them a variance to that 12 square foot size requirement. They could go up to 50% larger, so from a max of 12 to a max of 18 square feet, and only based on visibility. If there's a visibility issue in your sign, people can't see your signs, we can give someone the authority to make their signs a little bit bigger. It's a very limited purpose variance that's in there, and it's for that specific constitutional reason. We don't want to create for someone the argument that this code is it may be constitutional as applied to everyone else, but it's unconstitutional as applied to me because my message isn't getting out. Okay? For non-residential uses, temporary signs are a little bit different. Availability signs, which we should, examples of those that include your real estate signs and things like that, a max of 12 square feet. Event signs, holiday decor, grand opening signs, there's a time limit on that, and window signs with a time limit on that as well. These are for the temporary window signs. If they're up longer than that time limit, they become permanent, and there are different size requirements that come in. All right, then we get to signs that require permits. And basically, if it's not an exempt sign or a prohibited sign or a temporary sign, you have to get a permit for it. The section of the ordinance that you have in front of you has all the procedures for how permitting will be handled. And it does say that permits are not required for routine maintenance. If you're just changing parts, fixing your sign, that kind of thing, you don't have to have a permit for that. You only have to have the permit if you're doing something that's going to change what type it is, how tall it is, where it's located, or somehow make it non-conforming with the zoning code. So let's talk about some specific changes between what's in front of you and what's in our existing code. This one does now have clear provisions for signs with electronic changeable copy. And if I were a betting man, I would bet that most of the people that are here tonight want to hear about that, probably more than any of the rest of this part. So we will talk about that in more detail. We also made a change that real estate availability signs are now treated as temporary signs. Our thinking on that is real estate signs are something that they are put up on a temporary basis by design. They're up when the house is for sale and they come down after the house is sold. And there's really no reason to treat them differently than temporary signs, other than the fact that under our current code, a separate category has been carved out for them. We've done away with that separate category, so now all temporary signs are treated together. We also had a provision about awning signs. What our code says now is that awning signs cannot overhang a public right-of-way, which makes perfect sense on paper. But if you go down into the business district here on Far Hills, you'll see that most of those businesses are right up, the front of the building is at the edge of the public right-of-way. There's building, and then there's sidewalk. And if they've got an awning sign, it hangs over the public right-of-way. So we didn't want to set up a situation where that's illegal, because that's a kind of a necessity through that area to be able to have an awning sign. If you're going to have an awning sign, it is going to overhang the right-of-way. So what we've said now is you just got to leave enough, I think it's 8.5 feet of headroom, so that if anybody's walking by, they're not going to whack their head on your awning sign. And then we've prohibited permanent ground signs for residential properties. I can't think of an example of a residential property in Oakwood that does have a permanent ground sign. We have the Historical Society, which at one time was a residential property, and they have a ground sign, but that's in connection with a non-residential museum use now. Homes generally don't have these, but under our current code, if someone had come in and applied for a permanent ground sign in front of their home, we would have had no basis to deny that. It was arguably permitted on the language of the code, so we made it clear that that's not allowable. So those are the four of the specific changes we made. Continuing on, we've added address signs to the list of exempt signage. We tried to regulate that in the prior code, and we had some dimensions, but it was internally inconsistent with itself, and I'm just going to tell you that I'm very fortunate that I never had to actually enforce that in any way, because I would have been confused as to how to do that. We've added a couple additional signs to the prohibited classification, which I touched on before. We added flags and holiday decor to that exempt classification, because even though we don't regulate them now, we want to make it clear under the code that we don't regulate them, because we deal with a few calls from neighbors who don't like their next door neighbors, holiday decoration, things like that. And if we're not going to regulate them, we're just not going to regulate them. And then the marquee signs, as I told you. We've added a provision here that non-residential uses in a residential district, and that would include some of our churches that are located in residential districts, the Oakwood Community Center, the Historical Society, the Wright Library. We have a number of non-residential uses that are located in residential districts. We have added in a requirement that those signs, lighted signs, be turned off. My slide is wrong, I believe. Isn't it 10 to 7? I think it's 10 to 7. I apologize. I believe it's 10 to 7.
Yep.
Signs will be off from 10, can be back on at 7 a.m. Those times were selected to mesh with the existing times we have for our noise ordinance here in the city. Just like we expect people to, cool down the loud parties after 10 o'clock at night, we're going to expect them to turn off the lights on their illuminated signs. The exception for that is if it's a business that's still open, or if it's a church that's having a midnight mass or something like that, they're going to want to have their sign on. If they're open at the time, they can still have the sign on. Number 10 on the list, we've added a sunset provision for pole signs. And you remember the slide before I showed you? We have 3 of them. They're at Kinsler Realty, PNC Bank, and I think it was Huntington Bank. They have these old pole signs. Those have been prohibited under our zoning code for at least going back to 2001 when this current zoning code was adopted. They may have been prohibited under the prior version as well. The ones that you see here in town are grandfathered from way back when. They're what lawyers call a prior non-conforming use that's been grandfathered in because they're old enough to do that. We don't want to allow them to remain indefinitely. And the reason I say that is if you go by, and I don't mean to single out or pick on any business. There was a time when a lot of our businesses down there had pole signs in the business district. If you go down there now, in the Far Hills Business District, for example, in that block between Orchard Drive and Triangle, the Kinsler Realty sign that's there stands out like a sore thumb. And again, I'm not trying to single them out. It's a beautiful sign. They redid the face not too long ago and made it look nice. But because it's a pole sign, it sticks out perpendicular to the street, whereas all the other businesses have signs lined up on the face of the building. It just stands out there. And which is why pole signs, I think, were prohibited back when they were. What we've added to the code is a requirement that after 10 years, that grandfathering would go away. They can keep their pole signs for the next 10 years, but they need to have a plan. They need to be thinking down the road to what they're going to replace that with that's conforming at that time. Number 11, we touched on that. We've reduced reliance on the 1997 Building District Design Guidelines. That's what that little acronym means. We've set up projecting signs to require a special use permit. And the reason for that is that, like what I was just describing with the Kinsler sign, if you have a sign that's perpendicular in an area where all the other signs are lined up in line with it stands out. It looks odd. It's not to say that projecting signs are bad, but you kind of have to have an eye for where it's going and make sure that it's compatible and that it blends and fits in there. The insurance agency across the street has one and it fits in just fine there, but it might not in a different location. So what we've said is if you want to have a projecting sign like that, you need to come to the Planning Commission and seek a special use permit, which is a fairly short proceeding. You just have to put on some information about what you're proposing to do, where you're planning to have it, and the Planning Commission has a set of standards that they go by to determine if that fits with the character of the neighborhood or not. So those would require a special use permit. 13, we've already touched about. We merged some of the categories where the definitions were redundant or confusing. Number 14, we have now added into the code a requirement that if you have a monument sign on your property, you need to put some basic landscaping around the base of it just to sort of soften that a little. Generally, that happens anyway because most new monument signs come with new development. For example, over at Sugar Camp, as they've put in a new business there, you get a new sign there, and they landscape it. That's usually submitted as part of the developer's landscaping plan. But that's not codified into law here in Oakwood, so we wanted to go ahead and add that in now. And then number 15 is maybe important. We have a new section in the sign chapter to address non-conforming signs. If you look at our overall zoning code, signs are chapter 12, and chapter 13 talks about nonconformities. Nonconformity is a common topic in the zoning world. Something that doesn't conform with the zoning code is a nonconformity. It could be a nonconforming use of property. It could be a nonconforming structure on the property or something that's built too close to a lot line, that kind of thing. The chapter that we have, that chapter 13 in our zoning code, if you read through it, it does include signage. It was meant to address any kind of non-conforming use, but if you actually read the text of it, it really speaks more to non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures and doesn't include a lot of the provisions that we'd like to see in a section dealing with signs. So we have added an additional new section right in the sign chapter, a section of non-conforming use provisions that specifically apply to signs. A lot of the same ideas that are in that Title 13, we've just put it into what I'll call sign-compatible language. Okay? So I told you I made some other changes to comply with federal law. This is a lot of the content-neutral type changes that we made. Wanted to get into detail a little on those. We've expanded the purpose provision at the very beginning of the sign ordinance to include the city's commitment to free speech. We've got all these purposes, like the things I talked to you about at the beginning of my presentation. We want to ease, and aid in the identification of buildings, make it easier for people to find the things that they're looking for. We want to protect public health, safety, and welfare. We have all these good objectives in mind. We wanted to add to that list that one of our purposes is also to protect and preserve free speech. So that's been added to the purpose provision. The content neutrality has been added wherever possible, and I included a reference there. That Reed versus Town of Gilbert case was a fairly recent U.S. Supreme Court case in Arizona. That's the case where the idea comes from that if I have to read the sign to know how it's regulated, it's not a content neutral regulation that I'm dealing with. The administrative variance provision for temporary signs, I mentioned that already, and reviewing and revising definitions for clarity and content neutrality. Those are the changes we made to comply with federal law. Now I get to the part that I think most people are interested in hearing about. These are the electronic changeable copy signs. What I've tried to do with this draft is I have tried to, the overall goal here is to try to embrace new technology but to include enough restrictions on it that it can be used in a way that is still compatible with Oakwood. And so we've tried to come up with restrictions that will still allow the signs to be used and to disseminate information, which is what they're designed to do, but to do so in a way that impacts neighborhoods, particularly residential neighborhoods, because that's where we're gonna be seeing these, particularly to protect residential neighborhoods. So we've limited them to specific uses, and those uses are places of worship, educational institutions, and government facilities only, not businesses. You're not going to see them up and down the Far Hills Business District or down at the Route Song Shopping Center there in the Neighborhood Business District. You're going to see them at places of worship, educational institutions, and government facilities. I think our count was that there are 12 or 13 properties in town that would meet one of those three categories. Must be a monument sign, not a sign mounted up on the wall or mounted on the building somehow. You'd only be allowed to have one per property. The property must have at least 100 feet of frontage on a street, meaning we wouldn't want them on smaller properties in a small, dense residential area. You need to have it on larger lots so that it's back from other properties and from the street somewhat. There would be a 15-foot setback mandated from the public right-of-way and any lot line. For any other kind of signs, that setback is 8 feet. We've increased it for the electronic ones to keep them back from the street a little bit and from neighbors. And then the orientation of the sign for those electronic changeable copy, this is a case where you do want signs perpendicular to the street. You don't want people to have to turn and look to read the content on a sign that's facing sideways as they go by. And you don't want to create a situation where they might need to have two to be visible to traffic coming from either direction. So what we said instead, and this is common to other cities that have adopted these types of provisions, what we said is that sign needs to be perpendicular to the roadway. Most of them will be constructed with a double face, meaning that they can be read by people heading in one direction. They can also be read by people heading in the other direction. A single sign oriented perpendicular to the center line of the street that you front on. There is an option for corner properties to orient it diagonally towards the corner, and you've seen the sign at the OCC. That's how that one is. Another one that I thought of as an example is the Oakwood United Methodist Church at Schaefer and Hadley. They have an existing sign oriented diagonally to the corner of Schaefer and Hadley. And they would be able to do this. As long as it's built far enough back and meets the rest of the code, they would be able to have that diagonal installation as well. Electronic changeable copy signs would be subject to the same size requirements as any other monument sign, meaning the same height requirements, the same sign face area, etc. The display screen would not be allowed to exceed 50% of the sign face. So if you look at the sign that's currently at the OCC, the entire face is a digital screen. Under the ordinance that's in front of you, only half that space would be able to be used for a digital display screen. The rest would have to be some sort of a painted display or just architectural part of the structure of the sign. Minimum character height, we've set it at 5 inches. That's to ensure that it's readable and that people aren't squinting to read little text from their car. The signs would have to display the entire message at one time, no scrolling, no fading, no movement, no flickering, no blinking, none of that sort of thing. The whole message at one time. Transitions would be instantaneous. So there's a message, and then it goes away, and there's another message. That's the only transition we would allow, with a minimum display time for the message of 10 minutes. So you would have a sign that stays static, does not change for at least 10 minutes at a time before it changes, and when it does, that change would be instantaneous. We've prescribed a single, the copy must be single color copy, not a kaleidoscope of multiple colors on the screen at the same time. One color for your text against an unilluminated background. Now that's what you see there now. It's white text on that sign now. The ordinance that you have in front of you tonight would not limit it to just that white text, but it would retain the unilluminated background. You could have a blue message, you could have a yellow message, as long as the background is unilluminated and the message is displayed in a single color. There is a provision there that authorizes a safety department to have input if someone wants to have red copy or green copy or something close to a traffic signal and it's going to cause some confusion, or the safety department has safety concerns about the sign being in proximity to traffic signaling, they can restrict it and tell someone, I'm sorry, you can't use red on your sign because of where it's located. It's going to create a safety issue. These signs have to be turned off between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. That's the illumination requirement that I mentioned previously. They have to be turned off between 10 and 7 a.m. unless there's a special use permit granted for extended hours or the business is actually open. The signs would have to be equipped with an automatic dimmer. That's an important one because we think daytime and nighttime, but they're not it's not that daytime is a fixed level of brightness and nighttime is a fixed level of brightness. If you ever sit there with your cell phone or your iPad trying to read your email before you go to bed, you'll see that your screen gets dimmer on your phone. It detects the ambient light and it dims your screen. These signs are now made with the same kind of technology. They can put the automatic dimmer switches in them. And it'll automatically detect ambient light levels and drop the light a little bit if it's overcast or it's getting dark out. Boost the light a little bit if it's bright daylight. The sign's hard to read, getting washed out. They have the automatic dimmer ability, and we would require that they use that. The maximum daytime brightness is 5,000 nits, and I believe a nit is a measure of 1 candela falling on 1 square meter. I'm not an engineer, I'll tell you that. It's a unit of measuring light. 5,000 nits is what I'm hearing from other cities is a reasonable max for daytime brightness, and 125 is the max nighttime brightness. Within that, the dimmer switch would take over and kind of control where that's set. I want to talk about a couple changes, and this is, I hope this is not where things get too confusing. I'm going to try to keep it from getting too confusing, but it may. I'm going to grab a couple things and then I'll get back to the microphones. When the Planning Commission heard this, what they voted to do by a vote of 3-2 was to recommend approval of the ordinance on a condition that certain provisions be deleted from it. And I referenced the 3 sections up there on the slide. One of those is the combustible materials one that I mentioned with the wood signs. The other 2 are the provisions dealing with electronic changeable copy. And I think that the message from the Planning Commission was that they did not feel that the electronic changeable copy signs fit in Oakwood. They did not want to approve it with that in there. I think my read on the Planning Commission was that they were all in agreement about the combustible materials provision. I think everyone agreed that that should come out because we want to allow wood signs. But there was disagreement on this issue of the electronic signs. 3 of the members were against it, 2 of the members were not. So we're going to talk about that issue because what you have in front of you, you have the cover ordinance and then the exhibit attached to it. The exhibit that you have in front of you is exactly what went in front of the Planning Commission. It hasn't been changed at all. I didn't take out any of the things that they recommended be deleted. I just left it as is, as it was submitted with the application. I'm here as part of city staff tonight to ask that at least to a certain extent, that the Planning Commission's recommendation be disregarded. And what I mean by that is all 5 members of the Planning Commission agreed as to the non-combustible materials provision. And city staff is certainly agreeable to taking that out as well. City staff is not in agreement with the decision regarding the electronic changeable copy signs. And so we are asking that those 2 provisions dealing with the electronic changeable copy signs not be deleted. If that weren't confusing enough, I have one other change to talk about. And this is not a change that was heard by the Planning Commission, but it is not a material change in the sense that it would not have changed the outcome because the Planning Commission, at least 3 of the 5 members, were asking that the electronic changeable copy provisions be deleted completely. And this has to do with one of them in particular. What I have here, and I'll give you all a copy of it, I want to describe it first. I talked about the orientation of those electronic changeable copy signs and how they're, under the code, they would be set up perpendicular to the street unless you have a corner installation, in which case you'd orient it toward the corner. I have a feeling that some of the churches in town are going to want to put these up. Some of the governmental facilities, some of the schools. We may start seeing a few of these. And these signs are certainly not cheap. They're very costly, in fact. Some of the churches in particular may want to retrofit their existing sign rather than tearing down an existing sign and building a new one. They may want to upgrade that by retrofitting it. And if they've got a location that already meets the setback requirements and all the other requirements that I went through that apply to those electronic changeable copy signs, we wanted to add a provision that would allow them to keep their existing structure and just swap out the face with an electronic display. As long as it meets the 50% requirements and the 15 feet back from the right of way and all the other requirements, would allow them to retrograde or retrofit their existing light to add an electronic changeable display. So that is an additional change. If these 3 code sections that you see on the slide there, those are the ones that the Planning Commission recommended. This would, I guess, be a 4th provision. And what I have prepared, I want to make sure that everyone in the audience here tonight has a chance to have a copy of what I'm talking about, and that council has a copy as well. So what I'm going to hand to you first, handing to you first is a document that is marked alternate exhibit up in the corner. And I'll show it to all of you here in the audience. I wrote alternate exhibit up there. If anyone does not already have one and would like one, I have copies here. And before you get too far in that document, you're going to look at it saying, I can't tell what you changed, Rob. And the reason you can't tell is I made that a clean copy. I pulled off copies of the 2 specific red line changes that have been made to that. And I'm going to give you those as well. The one that's coming to you right now is the change regarding the combustible materials. And just shows that we're deleting the sentence about signs being made out of non-combustible materials. I'm going to give you a second one. This is the one about the sign orientation. And that's the language that I just talked about. This is, as long as your sign was lawful and permitted when you put it in, and it meets all the other requirements of the chapter, if you want to retrofit it or upgrade it, you can do that. So it's kind of a lot to have in front of you at one time. What I'm here to ask tonight is that council approve the ordinance. In particular, what you have on the document marked alternate exhibit. Again, that alternate exhibit is exactly what was considered by the Planning Commission with only 2 changes. I did not take out the electronic changeable copy provisions because staff would still like to request that that be approved. I took out the provision about the non-combustible materials, and I have expanded the section about the orientation of the sign. Those are the 2 changes that I circulated. Those are the only 2 changes in the alternate exhibit from the version that was considered by the Planning Commission. And so what staff is asking is that the updated ordinance be approved with the alternate exhibit. And with that, I will end my presentation, just answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Before we do the public hearing, does anybody on council have some questions for our law director?
I didn't see this. Is there a deadline by which those are wouldn't be in compliance with the zoning code changes?
Well, when the code gets, I say when, maybe that's too presumptuous, if the code gets changed tonight, it'll take 30 days for those changes to take effect, first of all. So if we did it tonight, that ordinance would take effect first week of June, give or take, is when the ordinance would take effect. People would not have to get into compliance with this. The way that's the prior nonconformities that I talked about. If someone has a sign now that would end up being illegal or nonconforming under the new code, they'd be allowed to keep that until such time as the sign is destroyed or needs to be replaced or so on and so forth. If it's one of the pole signs, they would have the 10-year sunset provision that I talked about, and we would work with them, make sure that they're aware of that well in advance. The idea of that is not to just unfairly burden a business owner by having to replace a sign, but to give them sort of a long runway to plan for that, which is why we arrived at 10 years for that.
Just to clarify, restrictions on illuminated signs. 10 to 7, 10 p.m., 7 a.m., they would all have to be turned off.
Yes.
Changeable copy, it could only be changed after a 10-minute period.
We would have to display a message for at least 10 minutes before changing. Yes.
Right. Now, it could be 30 minutes, but it has to be at least 10.
Yes.
It's going to be flashing.
Theoretically, they don't ever have to change
Yeah, they
it.
could be static.
Right.
Yeah. And then the always single color
Single color.
at a time for a 10-minute period.
I mean, you could have the blue message up for 10 minutes.
And then a yellow
And then the
message,
yellow
right.
message for 10 minutes, yeah.
Right, single color at the time. And they'll all be required dimmers, and that's automatic, and that's when you get into the nits and the illumination, but
Correct.
all of them will have dimmers.
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you.
If they don't have a dimmer, it would be a zoning violation, and we would have an enforcement protocol for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I have a few. I want to just clarify, political signs are allowed, multiple signs are allowed in your yard as long as you don't exceed a square footage limit. Is that correct?
It's an aggregate square footage limit.
Okay. Home for sale signs are considered temporary signs. Now, what happens if, I thought you said you had a 45-day rule in here. What happens if it takes longer to sell your home in 45 days?
The 45-day rule was for window signs.
For window
If they're in your
signs.
window for more than 45 days, it would be deemed a permanent sign, and
Okay.
then there's different size requirements that
Okay,
apply. You
so-
can still keep it, you just have to make it smaller
Okay.
at that point.
All right. And
But it would
then-
not apply to real estate signs or something stuck in the yard.
Okay. Now, I always thought that if you put a sign on Schaefer in the median that has an arrow saying home for sale, that was illegal. Is that still illegal?
Yes.
Okay, so there's no
Yes, it would
change.
still be illegal. That's considered an off-premise sign, advertising a good or a service or a
I
business
can
or
put
whatever that's not
I
on
can
the
put a home
premises
for
where the
sale
sign
sign
is.
in my yard, but I can't put one at Far Hills and Delwood that say,
Right.
go this way to see my home.
And you can't put a sign in your yard that says, "My home is for sale" on the other side of Oakwood.
Okay.
Same with garage sale directional
Correct.
signs. Right.
Okay.
That's always
Correct.
been-
Home improvement signs, somebody's doing your roof, I always thought those were illegal. Are you now saying that those are legal?
They are not. They would still be, they would be considered off-premise signs. They're, again, advertising a
Okay.
business. It's not at that
So
location.
XYZ Roofing Company can't put a sign in my yard if they're redoing my roof,
Correct.
all right?
Fortunately, the Supreme Court has said that commercial speech is probably the most regulatable kind of speech that there is,
Okay,
much more so than political speech, religious speech.
all right, and these electronically changeable copy signs for churches, is there any specific church that exists now? If we allow electronic change copies under these restrictions that Rob was referencing, do any of those churches have to change their signs?
No one has to change their signs at all.
All
I mean, they
right.
can keep the signs they have right now. They're legal today, and they will be legal the day after this ordinance becomes law, if in fact that's what happens. So no one's required to change their sign, with the exception, I guess, of the 3 pole signs that'll have to come down within the next 10
In
years.
10 years, all right. Now, the OCC sign, if we pass this ordinance today, what happens to that OCC sign?
Okay, that's a good question. The OCC sign, the one that's there now, it would be too large under the code that you're voting on tonight, or the sign chapter that you're voting on tonight. What's there now, if you look at that display, it's roughly 25 square feet, just ballpark, 5.5 by 4.5 maybe for the display. It's a 25 square foot display area. What we would have to do is make that smaller. We would go down to a sign that had a display of no more than 17 square feet. It would be the same dimensions as the old sign that was there that was taken out last fall to make room for this one.
All right, and this one currently has electronic format?
The one that's currently
the one that's
installed?
there.
Yes.
You'd still be able to do that, but it has to be smaller.
It would
It's
have to be
still the
smaller.
one color, it still goes off at night.
Yes.
Is it meet the NIT requirement, the NIT's requirement as far as illumination?
I have been told that it does.
Okay.
The gentleman from the sign company who was out here, all of that is programmable, and I've been told that he set that where it's supposed to be.
Is the 17 square foot, is that just for the illumination portion?
Well, it would be the sign face area
Oh,
would be
okay.
17 square feet. That remember
That
that
includes the
50% of the area has to be the digital screen, and
Okay.
50% would be
So
something
the
other than a digital
illumination
display.
portion plus the border, I'll call it, that
Right.
says Oakwood Community Center, that's made out of wood or aluminum or whatever it's made out of.
Right.
That is all in the 17 square foot. Okay. Yeah.
And
Actually, if
then
you want to see a great example just close by here of a sign that's got the 50-50, what I'll call regular sign and digital sign kind of mix, go to St. Albert's over on Far Hills. They've got one right out by the road there that's got their static St. Albert's Church logo or sign on I think it's the left half of the face and the digital part on the right half of the face.
Okay. And then my final question, because it appears as though you've done a very thorough job of redoing this ordinance, and it sounds to me like the only two issues that the Planning Commission had was allowing combustible signs or allowing signs made by wood, not prohibiting those.
Requiring that all sign materials be non-combustible.
Okay.
There was concern that would prohibit
And so
wood.
we've deleted that
Yes,
because we think a wooden sign is okay.
correct.
All right. And then, so then the question is, are the restrictions related to electronically changeable copy either too restrictive or should they not be approved altogether? That appears to be the only open issue related to this ordinance.
I think
Based on the, and I know we have a planning commission person here, and I'm assuming you may want to address us, but you may not, but you're welcome to. So we can get to the bottom of that during the public hearing.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think the planning commission was in full agreement, all five of them, that they want to make the change on the non-combustible materials.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a controversial point at this point in time. We're really talking about the electronic signage and
Okay.
whether that's a fit for Oakwood or not. And I know everybody has different perspectives on the topic, whether Oakwood is a historical community. Certainly we have plenty of historical properties, but are we solely a historical community, or do we want to embrace some modern technology a little bit with and try to come up with some reasonable limitations for that, but to embrace some modern technology here in our community?
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one more. On, let's call it political signs or levies, candidates, the temporary governmental signs, we'll call them, different names. I get the square footage rule. Wasn't there a rule about you could only put one up 30 days in advance of the event?
There was.
Yes.
You were going to give me a chance to dispel one of the biggest urban legends out
That's
there.
an urban legend.
A lot of people think they can only have it for 30 days before the election or whatever, and that may have been part of our code in the past. It has not been for a long time, because the courts have decided that if you only allow political signs for the 30 days before an election, effectively what you've done is you've said, thou shalt not engage in political speech the rest of the year. You've outlawed political speech 11 months out of the year, and so we don't want to have a time limit in our code.
So we're not going to limit, for example, a Bill Duncan for council sign, that could be up all year long?
It could be up all year long, yes. It will probably only be at his house, but,
And I'd have to get my wife's approval.
yes.
Yes. Okay.
Because she'd have to move it every time she cuts the grass, right?
No, I still cut the grass.
All right, so there's no limitation on how long those could be up?
Yeah, we don't time limit those.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you for your report.
Thank you.
We'll now open a public hearing for any people who wish to address council regarding this ordinance. And if could I see like a show of hands of how many wish to speak? Okay. If you all could, well, let's have everybody stand up and he'll swear you all in at one time. Okay.
You don't have to insert your name, you just have to affirm it. Do you all swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in any testimony you give before city council tonight? Yeah, I have your All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Who would like to go first? You're welcome to come down to the podium, but please give us your name and address so that we have that for the record. Oh, come on, you all stood up.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, I'm Abby Urbis. I live at 406 Greenmount Boulevard. Are we allowed to ask questions as well as make comments? Or
Within some discretion, we normally like people to not make repetitive comments, and we normally like them to keep their comments to about 3 minutes.
Okay, sure. I won't take up that much time, for
in
sure.
Oakwood, we sort of use. I have as the mayor have a lot of discretion on that. So if
Okay.
I keep hearing the same people saying the same things, I might cut you off. But since you're first, you're going to get extra time.
All right, great. Okay, so I just had a couple of dimension questions before I maybe make my point. So this is, of course, in regards to the OCC sign. I think you said that due to the square footage of the property, their sign would have to be 17 square feet, and half of that could only be the electronic copy. Is that correct? So-
In general figures, the 17 is kind of.
So it would be like
A rough
8.5
number.
square feet of copies. So I was just thinking from a message display perspective, that kind of renders the sign virtually useless if the requirement is also that the letters have to be 5 inches tall, which I believe is a very good measurement just from a legibility perspective. I work in retail design, and I think that's, as you're driving by, you want to be able to read the message without having to slow down or turn your head. So I think that that's a really good, accurate number. So if you kind of do the math in regards to this sign in particular, I think you'll be able to get about 12 characters on the sign, and that's just not much of a message. So I just wanted to, I don't know if anybody was thinking about it in terms of like the amount of letters that they're going to be able to display. So I just don't know if it makes it worth it to kind of deface the look of our community with this lighted sign if it's not really going to say much. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Do you have what types of messaging is currently being shown on the OCC sign? Is it like junior high dance, 8 o'clock Friday? Is it something as simple as that?
It's that kind of thing. More often than not, if you go by there now, I think it's just time and temperature and something fairly basic. The goal, as I've heard it from the Leisure Services Department, is they want to be able to advertise their upcoming events. That, hey, Easter egg hunt this Sunday, that sort of thing, and be able to put it on there. I think what you're going to see are fairly short, and we don't want to. To be honest, we don't want to authorize great big billboards with huge long messages, because I think that would be the wrong thing to inject into the neighborhoods.
But you're saying if we pass this ordinance, our sign's going to be similar in size to what the old sign was?
Yes.
And did the old sign, did we have this 5-inch letter rule? I don't believe we had that.
We did not have that rule. So I suspect some of those letters were small. I don't know the exact size. They were, they were the manual changeable letters.
I've changed those signs before where you have the letters A, B, C, D, E, and you go out and change it. But those, to me, used to be about 5 inches. I'm just holding those things in my hand. But does the OCC feel that if we pass this ordinance, their sign will still be under the new rule, will be operative, or will it be a useless sign?
My understanding is that they still plan to have one.
They still want to have a sign, it's just
Correct.
going to be a smaller sign.
Yes.
All right. Who else would like to, well, please come down and state your name for the record. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name is Rob Degenhart. I live at 701 Schaefer Boulevard.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to just tell everybody that I've enjoyed living in Oakwood for 17 years. My children are excelling in college right now due to their K through 12 education and experience that they've received in this great community. My expectations of what a community the caliber and with the fabric of Oakwood, Ohio means to me, and my expectations have been consistently met and mostly surpassed with the quality of services that I've received in my 17 years. Thank you. I rode my bike up tonight and the bike rack's gone, so maybe a bike rack. Terms I'm going to use tonight in my comments: discriminatory, fabric of the community, caliber of the community, and freedom of speech. You'll hear those a couple times. I just want to ask a couple questions about the Planning Commission vote. It was a little uncertain. That was a 3-2 vote against the electronic message board. Is that correct? Okay. And staff is suggesting to vote against the Planning Commission's request. Is that correct?
That's what he has recommended to
Okay.
us, yes.
And it sounds like, because of maybe a slight slip of the tongue, that the work session that happened just prior to the council meeting tonight was successful in possibly moving this vote against what the City Planning Commission has
Well,
recommended.
we don't do straw votes in our work sessions. They are a public meeting, but nobody showed up.
Oh.
But it is.
I'll be there next time.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
Sir, if I could interrupt briefly, and I don't want to stop your momentum, or I just want to,
Okay.
I want to make this very clear for the record, because from a legal standpoint, it matters. Council would not and could not consider this in a work session like that when they've got a pending public hearing out here.
Perfect.
This was not, are you referring to the changes that I kind of introduced here tonight?
I am.
Those were, I brought those did not come out of the work session we had
Very good.
tonight. I had them with me when I got
I apologize. I'll take back that statement. Another question. There was a comment made that internally illuminated signs were not permitted. Is that correct? Internally illuminated signs are not permitted.
correct.
What is an unilluminated background mean? And why is that not the exact same thing as an internally illuminated sign? Those two terms almost seem, when you're referring to the electronic changeable copy, you're referring to it as unilluminated background. And I'm very familiar with the electronic message boards or the electronic changeable copy signs and the type of lighting that's used. And to not call that an illuminated background, I think, is irresponsible. So my question is, what is unilluminated background?
I guess I'd have to refer you to the ordinance copy that you have there.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay, enough said. Perfect.
yeah, if you're just looking for sort of a layout, what I'm talking about are, if you look at those digital displays, they're made up of individual
Yes.
pixels or lights or
Yep.
what have you. The background would
Bulbs,
have to
light bulbs,
remain
they're light bulbs.
correct.
Yes.
The bulb, the lit part
That
would be
are-
the
bulb-
copy.
The light from the bulb is at the very back and shines out.
I don't know
Okay.
if that's accurate or
I'm
not.
gonna move on.
I'm not
gonna move
disagreeing
on.
with that, but my point is that the letters that make up the text would be lit. The
From-
pixels or bulbs that make up the background would be unlit.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm moving on. There was something about awning signs over the right-of-way. I'm unsure. Those were current previously were not allowed over the right-of-way?
The current code says that they are not permitted over the right-of-way, yes.
Okay, it says they're not permitted, but we know Oakwood, Starbucks, Oakwood Club, many other businesses along Far Hills Avenue have awnings that extend out over the public right-of-way.
Correct.
So we're kind of catching up.
To be honest, I don't know if it's a catch-up or not, and I'm not trying to be cute when I say that. It may be that previously it was interpreted that extending over the right-of-way meant couldn't be out over the street. And,
Okay.
And it may have been a previous
Enough said.
interpretation that it was okay to extend over the sidewalk but not the street.
Okay, that's fine. I'm moving on. You'd mentioned there that the city has a commitment to free speech in your presentation. I believe that the way this is written is not that you're discriminating against private businesses from having an electronic changeable copy sign by limiting it to religious, church organizations, houses of faith, government entities, and municipalities. I'm a small business owner. I find that to be discriminatory in nature. I commend the city for not having roof signs. So thank you for not having roof signs. As I mentioned, I think it's irresponsible to refer to these as electronic changeable copy instead of what the industry terms them as, which are electronic message boards. But I'll continue to use the city's term of electronic changeable copy. Communities like Oakwood, with the fabric and at the caliber that this community is, usually are restricting light, intrusive, electronic changeable copy signs. That is what I've seen mostly, that cities are very restrictive of lighted signs and signs in general. And it seems this is kind of going against that. To limit this type of sign to residential areas only seems at odds with what other communities, again, with the caliber and with the fabric that we enjoy here in Oakwood. Limiting it to churches, government organizations, and schools, I believe, is discriminatory against private businesses. I think it could be potentially seen as an economic discouragement to companies that want to come in and build a business and put an electronic changeable copy sign. I believe it's a stain on the fine fabric of this town. To recap, I believe it's discriminatory against businesses, and it is really below the bar of the caliber of the type of community that I've lived and enjoyed for 17 years and will continue to enjoy and live. And I appreciate your hearing me out, and I hope you have heard what myself and the rest of us are going to have to say here. And I appreciate Planning Commission trying to, I think, do the right thing in voting against the electronic changeable copy or the electronic message board.
Thank you for your comments.
Any questions for me?
I have one clarification. You're saying, I thought I heard you say you were in favor of electronic changeable copy signs.
Oh, no. No.
But
no,
you're saying, if we were going to do it, we should allow it in the business district.
I believe that the sign, I believe the sign doesn't fit, period.
Okay.
But if you're going to allow them, then it's discriminatory against private business.
Okay, I understand your comment.
Yes, I do not think these signs should be in our neighborhoods.
Okay.
If I lived across the street from the community center, I'm on the other corner. I'm on Schaefer and Patterson. Okay. So I'm at the opposite corner of the current sign. But I walk the community. I walk past all the churches in the community. And if I lived, within an eyeball range of those lights, that electronic changeable copy, illuminated, unilluminated, whatever you're using, it's a light that comes out of a sign. I'm totally against that in the entire city of Oakwood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Who else would like to address? Please come down and state your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Yes, my name's Katie Cassidy. Cassidy. I live at 127 Lookout Drive. Been a resident here for at least maybe 8 going on 9 years. I have 4 children in the schools. Love the community. I came here tonight specifically to speak about this sign. I have several brief questions and just a few comments. First, my comments, I would like to address just the title in general. Firstly, I'd like to say I'm against the sign. I do think it does not address the purpose of this entire title to preserve the non-commercial character of residential neighborhoods in Oakwood. I believe the illuminated sign is an eyesore. There's a similar sign on the tennis courts hanging that's wood. It's beautiful. It's very classic, very classy. I think when you drive by the OCC, to have a large illuminated sign, it looks bad. The second, point B, to reduce traffic hazards by restricting signs and lights which exceed the viewer's capacity to receive information. I do think it is a distraction when you're driving. It's a very busy area. There's small kids crossing the street there that take ballet. There's high schoolers walking to and from school. Moms are driving and trying to look at the sign, trying to pick up their kids from different events. So I think it would be a conflict to parts A and B of the overall regulations here stated. The fact that the Planning Commission voted it down 3-2, I would like to hear from them and kind of hear their reasoning as well. Now my questions. I'm curious if we know when the sign was put up at the OCC. Does anyone know that? Mr. Jacks, maybe? Yeah, the new sign.
September, October, I think.
Okay.
Maybe,
So maybe
October, probably.
towards the end of the building of the courts? something
Yes,
like
it was
that.
part of that
Okay.
project.
Do we know if they obtained a permit?
If a permit was obtained, I can tell you the answer to that is no, and that was part of my presentation to the Planning Commission when
Okay.
we were in here in the first.
So, do we
the
know
first
the
place.
cost of the sign? How much did that sign cost? The taxpayers that I'm sure are responsible for.
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay, do we know how to find the answer to that?
We would have the answer here. The
We
city
would
staff-
have it?
The city staff would have that, yeah.
Okay, I would love to know that, because it seems that this ordinance is kind of retro enacting a law to help out the OCC who did not obtain the correct permit to fund this expensive and ghastly sign. That's my concern.
All right.
So I will leave that open to the rest of the people to voice their concerns.
Is that something that we can send to her via an email? what the
I think
cost
the
is?
residents would like to know the cost. I know I've spoken with lots of friends of neighbors, and they would be more in favor of having more online services at the OCC so they can register their children for classes. They feel that the funds would be well spent there. If we're talking technology, they would like to do that so that it helps them save time rather than investing in a big sign that maybe only helps, I don't know, the workers at the OCC to maybe not have to walk out there and change letters would be my guess. I have no idea, but that would
Okay.
be my guess. But
All right.
overall, I would like to say I definitely oppose it, and I think it's a waste of tax dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to address council? Thank you. Again, state your name and address for the record, and welcome, and speak into the microphone, please.
My name is Amy Korab. I live at 120 Spirea. I too have been here for 17 years. I pretty much am of the same exact opinion of Ms. Cassidy? Yeah. Basically, you know, was it permitted? How did it go up? If I put it in my yard, I'm pretty sure, which isn't far, at Spirea, if I had that sign in my yard, Krista? It would not be there now. I just think overall the aesthetic of the sign is terrible. When my husband noticed it driving by, I was like, wow, it must be bad because he doesn't notice anything. Well, like that, I mean. And I also think that the fact that these signs are up to be allowed by churches and the OCC and city buildings, whatnot, those are in our neighborhoods. I don't want those in our living area. Those types of signs belong, as far as, you know, I'm concerned, in the business district. you know, that's where I would expect to see a light up sign, not in my, what am I looking for here? My neighborhood, not where I live, in my comfort zone. It was shocking for me the first time I saw it. I was like, oh my God, what is that? So, I don't know, I think just generally, like Miss Cassidy said, I think it's a change to cover a mistake made by the OCC, and it's also going to be opening a can of worms for our community going forward. So, I'm against it.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
Who else would like to address council? Come on down. Again, name and address for the record. Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Augustine Urbis. I live at 406 Greenmount Boulevard. I agree with many of the comments that have been made. One thing I would point out, though, is these signs are expensive and they do contain a lot of technology, which includes the technology to flash and scroll and do all of these other things, which can be programmed out at the beginning, but likely will be activated later. So if you allow them to be in, before too long, you're going to create I would say a menace of enforcement, that all of these signs will have to, you'll have to either be calling the police on your local church because they've got a flashing sign or something like that now because they've activated a functionality that wasn't there initially. And it's just not going to increase the quality of life of people in Oakwood in any way. All of them could easily be replaced by a simple static sign that says, check our website for any updated information, especially given that they're going to be restricted, probably illegally, to churches, schools, and government buildings, which government buildings shouldn't be spending the money on them in the first place. And the churches, you know, again, they're in the neighborhoods. We don't need a distracting sign there, especially a lighted distracting sign there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Who else would like to address council? Again, name and address for the record, and welcome.
Shannon Tucker, 126 Lookout, right across the street from them.
Okay.
I just had a couple questions. For the record, I am also against the sign. In part of the booklet, it says special uses. What exactly is a special use? Like, would that be a junior high dance, the Easter egg hunt? Like, what is a special use? For the so many special uses a year they could use.
Special
It
uses
says
per
it's
year?
something about special uses, and then they could change it more often. Am I just reading that wrong?
I think that was under the 10 to 7 for,
Yeah.
and then the special use
Like,
would be maybe
what constitutes a special
a
use?
church would have a midnight mass, possibly, I think is
Okay.
what he was referring to.
Yeah, although that wouldn't be a special use. So that, I mean, they would be allowed, just right by the language in the code, they would be allowed to have it on if they're open for business.
Okay.
Yeah, and the example I used was a church that's having a midnight mass
Okay.
would want to have their sign on when people are being greeted to come to midnight mass,
Okay.
and they'll turn it off
So
after
it
the
wouldn't be
service
like
is over.
the junior high kids having one of their dances wouldn't be considered at the OCC like a special use?
Um,
Do they go past 10 p.m.?
It's been too long, I don't
I
know.
don't know if they go past 10 or not,
I
but
I don't think they do, but I'm not.
I'm only speaking for the OCC sign when I say
Okay.
this, but it would be on a timer that's going to cut it off
Okay.
at 10 sharp, no
My
matter what.
concern was how many special uses can there be in a year, and is there a limit, and what exactly is a special use? Is it just any sort of event, or is it really like Christmas is a one day a year?
Well, I think, and if I can respond, I think what you're asking is that you're actually confusing two parts of what
Okay.
I talked about special use permits for certain kinds
Okay.
of things, and that was the projecting signs would require special use permit
Okay.
approval before you could put up a projecting sign. What that is, it's just an additional approval process where you file an application with the planning commission, you come in here and you explain what you want to do, you know, how you want to do it, et cetera, and they decide if you get the special use permit based on meeting, we have standards spelled
Okay.
out in our code that they use to evaluate that. And the standards they all have generally to do with the compatibility of that proposal with the neighborhood that you're proposing it for.
Okay.
So that's an approval process for those things that are called special uses under our
Okay.
zoning code. And under this sign ordinance, there's a special use for projecting signs.
Okay.
That would be one that's available for someone to apply for if they wanted to put one of those on their business. The other would be if you wanted to have hours outside the 10 to 3. And let's say you come and you say, listen, and I don't know this, the Chabad, if they say, we have church services till 11 every week. We really need to be able to keep ours on until 11 because of those services. They could come in and file an application and make that case to the planning commission, and maybe it gets approved, maybe it gets denied. There's an evidentiary process that they would go through to determine
My
if they would.
concern would be, you know, the special uses, that could pretty much mean anything. And the signs could then be on past the hours, and say it is for a church. A lot of these churches are right next to houses or across the street from houses, and that could be very detrimental, I know,
Well,
to the citizens.
in that case, the extended hours are the special use, not the sign itself. They're
Okay.
coming in at basically seeking permission to operate something for extended hours. That's what that process is.
Yeah.
It's a cumbersome enough process that it's not something that somebody's going to do because they want to have a garage sale on Wednesday, and so they need to get in there and get a special use. That's more of a long-range permanent
So
arrangement.
it will legitimately be something that's a once-in-a-while thing, not something that's a weekly event. Do you see my concern? My concern is that it just becomes like more the norm than a real, quote, special use.
I still feel like we're getting tied in our
Okay.
terminology on this, and I'm not trying to be obtuse when I say
No,
that.
no, and maybe
You're
it's
talking about the amount of time that the lights are on.
that, and if there is a special event where it would need, like, for example, I'm on Athletic Boosters. When Athletic Boosters has their event at the OCC and it could potentially go till 11 or midnight or what have you, is that considered a special use? And because it's still open, and I'm not saying that it should, but then does the sign get to stay on longer, which is then obviously very distracting to the residents?
I guess if it's something where the OCC is open under this ordinance, would they be allowed to have the light on if they're still open? Yes. They would not be mandated to turn it off. But at least in the case of the OCC, theirs will be on a timer. It will go off at 10 regardless.
I know, just that phrase to me seemed very vague. Another question I had was, there was a talk about the time and temperature being on there. I'm not sure why that would need to be. We all have it on our phones and in our cars, and you know, you can get that anywhere. I don't really feel like that needs to be on there. And as far as the displaying upcoming and special events, I mean, I have kids in the school as well. We get flyers sent home from school. We get that really nice booklet that gets delivered to our house. There's events in the register, and I feel like per the OCC, they can even just start using their Facebook page more. I don't feel that the sign is part of an outreach for notifying us as residents of upcoming events. To me, it just seems unnecessary.
Are you saying you don't think we should have a sign at the OCC
No,
at all?
I'm saying, no,
Okay.
no, not have a sign at all, but a sign that's changing, what was it, every 10 minutes or what have you, or a big bright sign. I don't think that we need any sort of illuminated neon type of, I feel like the previous sign was perfectly fine, and I feel like everyone in the community, we are well educated on events going on based on flyers and books and the Facebook page.
And am I back to my original question to you, Rob? If this ordinance passes, we have to change that sign.
Yes.
To go back to something similar in size to what it was before?
Correct.
It's just a factor that we can type in a message inside instead of going out and changing the letters.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
but then it could change, what, it was every 10 minutes? Was that
The
right?
message could change no more frequently than
No
once
more
every 10
frequently,
minutes.
yeah, which I don't know that that's really necessary.
You'd have to sit through,
And it's still illuminated.
Yeah,
I mean, the other one was lit by what, landscape light or
Mhm.
what have you, which I feel like is perfectly acceptable. I just don't feel like the
Can I ask what the
illuminated.
difference is? If
For what,
Yeah, I'm
Lan-
curious.
for
If you
this-
have landscape lights shining
Well-
up onto a sign, and if,
Well, the
as an
landscape
engineer,
lights are gonna go brightly into someone's house window, for starters. They aren't that bright. The lumens, or whatever the correct terminology are much lower. Is that kind of what?
yeah, I'd like to finish my,
Oh,
my
I'm
question,
sorry, I'm sorry.
What I'm trying to ask is that, you know, if a sign has external landscaping lights, and I totally understand that, if it was totally dark out and those lights come on, an engineer with a light meter is going to be able to tell you that there's a certain number of lumens that are being produced by that particular light, regardless of the direction of what it's doing. You know, if the light or if the sign is bright white, it's going to reflect a lot of that lumens are going to be out in the atmosphere. If the internally lit sign, or whatever we want to call it, if the lumens were the same, is there a difference? That's one of my questions, is if this light, this amount of light is the same, regardless of whether it's shooting towards it or whatever, you're saying that there's an aesthetic difference between...
There's an aesthetic difference, and to me, the amount of light, lumens or whatever, being reflected back off that sign is going to be considerably less if my house is right across the street or I'm walking by versus the backlight illumination that's coming out. I think that would be much... I remember driving by and not being distracted by the light by the previous landscape lights, and I have driven by since or walked my dog by and been very distracted by how bright that sign is. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Who else would like to speak? I'm going down the list here, and I only see one last person. Welcome. Oh, I'm sorry, is there another one? Is someone hiding back there?
The difference between constant and acceptable landscape lighting and an LED motion, even if it's only one color, it's the motion of the light. It's when the message changes. You have, I don't know, have you ever been to New York? I've spent a lot of time there in Manhattan, Times Square. I've stayed at the Marriott Times Square. You have night blackout curtains, but you still have action happening outside, and you feel that action. And if I'm living across the street from the OCC, every time that message changes when it's dark, even in the daylight, you notice it, though not as much. It's the motion of the sign. It's not necessarily the brightness of the sign, even though that does matter. It does matter. It's every time that message changes, it's a disruption in your vision. If you live there, if you're walking by there, you notice it.
So you're concerned about that change, that it could happen every 10 minutes? You're still concerned about that?
No, it's not a concern. You just asked what's the difference. The difference is the motion of the lights, the changing of the configuration of the words every however often. And then if they're only changing, what, you said every 10 minutes?
That's the earliest it could change, correct? It could change every half hour if they choose to.
Yeah, they could do it they could leave it up all day.
I understand that, but
We're
at
talking
that
worst
point,
case
we're
scenario.
not really conveying much of a message, like to drivers by, passers by. I don't think people are going to hang out there to see the full messages going by
Right. No, that's very
every
true.
10 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, what's the point then? Have a static sign at that. I don't know. That's just my opinion anyway. I just wanted to kind of help throw my 2 cents in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He had a slide that said reasons for a sign code.
The what? I'm sorry.
Reasons for a sign code.
Cindy, it's probably the second or third slide. Or the fourth, maybe? There you go.
Is that the one you're referring to?
It is. the
Welcome.
purpose
Could
of a
you
sign
identify
code.
yourself for the record?
Yes, I will. I'm
Okay.
Harrison Gowdy. I live at 151 Aberdeen Avenue. I have a really short statement here that I wrote about a month ago. I already had my no vote on Planning Commission, of course. But the people in the audience said most of the things that I was going to say tonight. I do think that the changeable electronic sign in Oakwood will set a change to our visual landscape. And I'm not sure that that visual change is worth it. When this all came about, we were talking about a change of technology from the manual changing sign to the electronic changeable sign. And Oakwood's a classic city, which everyone has said, and I feel that we have worked hard to stay free of the latest fads. Our city, our schools, our churches, and our residents are all beautifully maintained, renovated, and preserving their classic structures. These signs are not classic, and they will come and go as technology does. People carry computers in their pockets, And if you're interested in upcoming events, there's much faster and more convenient ways to get that information. The changeable electronic sign is not right for Oakwood. It does not fit our visual landscape, and there is no need to include them in our new sign code. So I sat here, this is the second time I've sat through this meeting, and I saw this slide come up and I thought, yeah, there's nothing about advertising, and that's not why we make a sign code. And we have these manual changing signs, but I think both the manual changing sign and the electronical changing sign, their time is over. That is not how we get information anymore. It's almost better to do a sunset on these and go to more of a monument sign that just says, this is the OCC. It would be a better purpose for a sign. I just feel that these are wrong for our community in many ways, and their time is over.
You're Harrison, am I correct that you're not opposed to the sign, you're opposed to an electronic sign?
Correct, and I think yes. And I think actually we started this because we're trying to say.
Oh, I'm sorry, you need to come back up so people at home, if there's people still watching, yeah.
Yeah, so we started all of this because we were trying to update the technology of a manual changing sign. So the idea was that we have manual changing signs, and the updated technology is an changeable sign. And that was how this all started. But I think their time is over. That way of disseminating information is done. And so I'm not opposed to a sign. I think that we're done with this kind of technology, that we don't get information about events by reading it on a sign outside of a building. That's not how anyone gets it. I loved her idea of taking the money and putting it to making more online registering for classes. I mean, that is brilliant. That is how we do things. We go online and we look for it and we say, oh, we can sign up for that, or oh, there's one next week or whatever. And I just feel like the whole concept of a manual changing sign and an electronical changing sign for the purposes that we're doing. We're not saying it's for businesses that are constantly advertising something instantaneously. These are static signs that provide information. They might as well just be a nameplate.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, one last question. Other than this, you liked everything else in this ordinance?
I thank city staff. I mean, it was really a hard process. You guys did a great job, and it was confusing and difficult. And I thought that the whole ordinance read really nicely, but
okay,
this was it.
Gotcha. Okay, has everyone addressed council that wishes to address council? I see you hiding back there. Okay, all right. If that's the case, we will close the public hearing, and council will begin our deliberations. I think you need to actually introduce this, I think. The ordinance or not? Or am I incorrect?
Do we do the motion before internal discussions, or do we do it?
I would suggest that you go ahead and start some deliberations. You
That's what I
need to
thought,
know
yeah.
what sort of motion you're going to frame.
Okay. All right. Who would like to start? Councilmember Epley, you hiding down there? Do you have any comments?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Okay. Councilmember Hilton, do you have any comments?
Nor do I, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Stevens?
Do we have, I will say this, I believe it's Abby, right? Abby did bring up a point that I have not thought of. Do we have any higher mathematicians in the audience? Because I did some math here, and yes, I have an Oakwood education. However, I want to make sure I want to make sure that we do have enough room based on the 17 square foot with the 5-inch letters. I would like to know that, because my math, and this is where I'm going to admit that I screwed it up, says that we may only be able to put 9 letters across with 9 letters. If it's, I did the old 17, and that was full too. I did a 4x4. So I need a math. Is this my mathematician right here?
They've changed the math, Rob. They changed it.
Yeah, they did change the math, so I don't know how to do math anymore. 15
per line, right?
For the square footage allowed, 5-inch letters, estimating a 5-inch width, including the space between
per line. Is that correct?
Or total?
How do you figure that?
In square footage allowed. So that would have to show up.
So the sign say is 5 feet tall, okay? 5-inch letter, okay? Okay, so 3 feet. So you would still have like 6 lines, wouldn't you?
So it's half of the 17 feet, right? 17 square feet of sign. Half of which
Could you come up to the microphone so the folks at home can hear this scintillating discussion?
The first thing is, what is your profession?
I am an engineer.
Perfect,
A
perfect.
scientist, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
17 square feet of signage, right? Give or take, yes. Half of that can be electronic, changeable type.
8.5.
8.5 feet, let's just
8.5
say
square feet.
Nice round, or 9, we'll give them a little bit more, they're 3 by 3. So if you have a 5-inch letter, it can't be stacked on another one, so it's 6 inches, so you've got 3 feet by 3 feet.
36 inches, yeah.
36 inches. You've got 2 letters, or how many letters high is that? 6 letters high?
Yes, 6 lines, say 6 lines high.
Let's say they're about 5 wide. 5
Okay.
inches, 6 inches wide too. So you've got.
I don't know if letters are, but regardless, yeah.
Yeah, rough estimate, right?
But if it said open house,
So-
Saturday, 7 a.m.
So that's 36, if you put it in a square grid, 36 characters. It's less than Twitter. Can't say a lot. So I think it depends a lot on how you arrange it. That's as tight as you could pack them. So
Are you
36.
saying we can't even put Oakwood
can't-
Community Center on this sign?
Well, that's the lighted changeable portion, right? So the rest of the sign you can format any way you'd like. But if you're mandating 5-inch letters, again, I think that trying to mandate those sorts of things will end up being hopeless because you can do anything on these signs. They're going to change, they're going to blink, they're going to scroll, they're going to do all those things. But
Well, no,
if you stick to the
not with our
code-
restrictions, they won't. I will
if-
defend
if
that.
you well,
But I'm concerned about the size.
If you stick to the, oh, all right, that's okay, that's okay. If you stick to the code, you'll have 36 characters
Okay.
that will change every 10 minutes,
Right.
which is a very low baud rate. This is worse than dial-up.
Okay.
So 36 characters.
Does that make sense?
You know, we still have until 2 in the morning because that was the all-time record meeting, so.
I was there for that.
Yes, okay, all righty. Other questions, Rob?
Go with Steve, I'll get back to you.
Okay, you're still drawing a picture, okay. Comments, Vice Mayor Byington?
Well, one comment I would like to make, and Harrison hit on it, is that I would like to thank Rob and Ethan and Jennifer from our city staff for putting this together. Despite the fact that we're focused on the electronic copy part of this, this was a very large undertaking to address all the signs in Oakwood. We're going to continue to talk about the electronic portion of it, but just going through and clarifying and weeding out all the stuff that was unclear was a large undertaking, and I think they did a fantastic job. I also like to thank the Planning Commission, Harrison being one of the members there, but also Andy Ite, Healy Jackson, and Greg Lauterbach, because they spent a lot of time, and I'm a member of that commission as well, spent a lot of time with the discussion back and forth on why they felt electronic changeable copy was not best for Oakwood. One of the things I kept focusing on, and that's why I asked the question, was just trying to understand the differences between because it kept coming up, well, this thing is lit, and yet if you walk outside right now, you're going to see lit signs throughout our community. There's visual distraction everywhere. So whether we allow this or not, that's not going to change. And I understand, I appreciate the comments about the movement of light. I hadn't heard that one before, that, you know, the changing of the sign creates a motion, and I can understand that. I don't know if I would consider it the same as Times Square, but you know,
What's the difference between ambient light and digital or LED light?
I understand that.
It's blinking.
Yes.
It's on, off. Even if it's every 10 minutes, it still could be in your bedroom. You know, if it's lit.
Yeah, I understand
it's off and it's back on, and
I
mean,
I freely understand that.
They say blinking can cause seizures, and could be a health concern.
Yeah, I will tell you that as an architect, I also understand that blinking is something that you really can't control, because even if you have a static light and you have traffic that goes in front of that static light, it creates a blinking effect as well. As somebody who's gone to a lot of planning commission meetings and argued with people who wanted to do something in their driveway, and suddenly people said, you know, when somebody pulls into their driveway with their headlights, it causes a disruption in my bedroom. I totally get that. But there's always going to be a certain amount of visual distraction and light. But I totally understand the comments that were made here. I thought that, and Harrison, I have a fundamental disagreement with that this technology is something that is, what would you call it, a fad? That it's something that's going to go away at some point, that suddenly we're all going to become so tuned into everything that we're not going to need the sign. I'll tell you that as somebody who, I've got a phone in my pocket right now, I'm on all the Twitter and all the other stuff, I still drive by the high school and I see that they're doing the Pirates of Penzance or something. The sign is up there. That's not on my feed somehow, and somehow that's information that I get. I could drive by the OCC, I see a little sign that says, there's the father-daughter dance. Is that information somewhere else? Yeah. Did I get it? No. So maybe that's me. Maybe I'm a dinosaur and I'm not on all the different things. But I don't really see the thought that if a church decides they're doing a potluck dinner, they're raising money for some charity, that's something, that information is going to be easily accessible to the entire community. One of the great things about our community is we're very walkable, and the ability to walk by things like a sign out in front of a church or out in front of the school allows us to get information. If that's happening all the time, no, it's not. You're probably getting the majority of your information from some other source. But it is something that I think there are people who do get that information from that. I mean, we have older members of our communities that, you know, they rely on when they're driving, they see something, and, you know, to know that there's going to be a mulch sale at the OCC or a plant sale or whatever the case might be. I think the thing that I noticed in the discussions about, and I think what this issue really boils down to, is whether we as a community believe that a electronic internally lit sign is fundamentally different enough from a sign that's lit from landscaping to say that that is not a part of the Oakwood character. And I think that's basically what this group is going to have to decide, is whether we believe that the sign itself has got information. We can't regulate what that information is. We're not about content. We're just about the display. What kind of sign it is, how it is lit, how do you see it at night at a certain time period. So from our standpoint...
Well, wait, our hearing's closed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the discriminatory part of it, you can say it's discriminatory, but we have legal precedent that says that we have the ability to make certain determinations for our particular community. I mean, you could say that Oakwood doesn't allow fast food restaurants. You could say that's discriminatory, but that's something that we've chosen to do as a community. You could say, you know, Oakwood doesn't allow chain link fence around your property. You could say that's discriminatory.
That's for everybody.
But that is for everybody.
And this is separating out business versus public. I'm good with no chain link. I'm good with no fast food. If you're allowing McDonald's in and saying no Chick-fil-A,
But you could say it's discriminatory to a business that says they want to move in. I don't want to get into.
Can we get this colloquy going between the members of council? since
Right.
the meeting's,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
the hearing's closed.
Basically, just, what I wanted to say is that this boils down to whether we believe a lit sign is in keeping with the character of Oakwood or not. I look at the character of Oakwood as a community that I walk all the time, that I drive through all the time. I see things that are lit all the time. If I'm in the business district, I look up and I see Flyboy sign is lit. Whether it's lit from inside as a little neon sign, or if it's in the window of Talbot's that I see their sign is lit up. It's not internally, but it's dark and I can see it, so it's lit. It's got a certain, like I said, I go back to the engineering aspect of it. If I pull out a light meter and I shoot that light meter at a sign and it reads 65 lumens, and then I point it at the electronic changeable copy, and I point it at it and it says 65 lumens, is there a difference between the two? Now, the movement of the light, okay, that was one I hadn't really taken into account, but to me it's, are we against lit signs? That's what I see this as being, so that's my comments.
All right. Again, I want to thank everybody who came and testified. I also want to thank our staff and our law director for spending a lot of hours getting this issue cleaned up, because it needed to get cleaned up. It appears to me as though the only issue and dispute are these two paragraphs regarding the electronically changeable signage. I think everyone else thinks that this product has been an outstanding product.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to vote yet, but I was thinking that if we vote to, well, I'm not certain what your motion's going to be, but if,
I'm not sure yet.
okay, okay, we could vote to approve it with the two minor changes that Rob had. The one change everyone agrees on is regarding the combustible signs, and then the other change was, again, it's in the electronically changeable category, and it's just a clarification on that in terms of the direction of the sign. So if we voted to not allow electronically changeable signs, I think the rest of this ordinance is going to be a good ordinance. The OCC is going to have to go back to an old style sign if they need a sign at all. I think they need a sign. I think I'm comfortable with an illuminated sign that we've had in the past. I'm not convinced in my mind that this technology is so onerous to the character of Oakwood, because we're typing in the message inside as opposed to going outside and having one of our workers change letters on a board. I can't get too excited about that one way or the other. So I'm thinking that I could probably go either way, but I think there's of the folks that it's like everything else when we have these meetings. Nobody ever comes to say they love electronic signs and we're all in favor, and there's probably, of the 9,902 people that live in Oakwood, there's probably, 9,102 that don't even know we're meeting tonight. But, and so, but I do think that the folks that come out here for that, they feel strongly about the issue. I'm not certain that we always want to say, okay, well, 7 people get to decide, but you got 5 people deciding. So I mean, I can go back and forth on that as well. So that's basically my comments that I have for the group. If anybody has any.
Mayor, I'd like to follow up on what Mr. Stevens was saying about whether the sign even can fit enough characters.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to finish that math? I know you're a year ahead of me at Oakwood.
He's still
class of
ciphering.
87. But
I had help from, this gentleman here, and I did a few Oakwood Junior High dance 5 to 7. I did coffee with veterans, that brings out something else I was concerned about, where I, disagree with the comments that it's outdated. We have a lot of people in our city that are not going to be on their phones, or not going to go to the website. We wish more people would go to the website. One thing I know was mentioned, so I'll throw it out there tonight. I have a planned question to talk to Cindy about later in our meeting about, because I've heard from some people about online registrations at the OCC, and I totally agree that we need to do that. Now, I don't agree with the comment that we shouldn't be doing a sign in order to do the online registrations. I'm of the opinion, if they're both good for our community, we do both. So that's gonna get brought up. However, you know, I think it has enough character space to put some messages out there. You know, I use the one, the Coffee with Veterans. That's a new, wonderful program the OCC is doing, and I guarantee majority of the veterans that they're inviting are not going to be on their, I'm not saying they're not using their computers, but they're not going online to look at these things. I like the idea of the OCC putting things out there, announcing the booster event, the junior high dances, the you know, the plant sale, all those different things. I would have been against this illuminated sign from the beginning if we didn't put these restrictions on there. Now, I like the 10 minutes. I like the amount of time that the light, the nits that get changed, you know. I don't want it lit up real, even though it's 10 o'clock, which I think is reasonable, you know, because I like it along with the noise ordinance. I don't want it on at 2 a.m. I get that. You know, whether I live close to it or not, I don't think it's right to have it on late, so I like those restrictions. The simple color, there's a lot of different things that make sense. I think I'm okay with the number of characters. However, you know, I would like to know from Carol and her staff if this limited number of characters, because I admitted I did not think about that going into this meeting. And if those number of characters are going to be enough for what they want to do. I'm not saying it isn't, but I would like to know if it is, because I don't want to say it's a good situation if all of a sudden she can't put in, you know, you could abbreviate, but would that really get the job done? So I don't want to have that whole sign just be a bunch of acronyms.
Well, did we have reasonable messaging in the old sign that conforms?
Those letters were not 5 inches. I'd be shocked if those were 5 inches.
I bet you they're pretty close. I bet you they were pretty close.
Sir?
I don't know.
In the interest of providing complete information, so I looked up an online sign letter count calculator, and according to the dimensions that we had talked about, it would be 75 characters, so considerably more than what we had originally, or what I had estimated before.
That sounds more.
75?
A bit more.
Okay. Okay.
That sounds more likely.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I did coffee with, for example, I did coffee with veterans Saturday, 8 a.m. - 11 a.m., and that was like 34 characters. So, okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. Okay.
Can I ask a question too about the signs that we currently have, whether that's OCC, in front of all the different churches, all the ones that are externally lit now? Do we have any complaints from neighbors on any of those currently? I mean, is that something that on an average month or year that we get somebody saying, you know, the light from Concordia is shining in my...
Ethan needs to come down and address council on that.
Just curious about that.
Thank you for coming down, Ethan. He's our code enforcement officer and doing an outstanding job.
Thank you, sir. I can honestly tell you I've never received a complaint from a church or business. Most commonly, what we do get complaints about are floodlights installed on private property that may be shining to a street or to a neighboring property. But I've never received a complaint about any of the existing lighting signs at any of the churches or schools.
Okay, thank you.
Do you, one quick question, do you have a light meter?
I do not.
Okay.
Do not have a light meter.
Okay.
Let's see, purchase one.
I do. They're cheap. I got one.
Councilmember Epley, did Rob address your question or no?
I think so.
All right.
Yeah.
Anything else? So do you want to decide what you want to propose?
Could I jump
Yeah.
in for a moment?
Sure.
As I'm kind of listening to this, I'm thinking, you know, one approach here, if you're seeking additional information about from the OCC using that sign and all that, you know, you could choose to table this, and then we could come back at the next meeting, pick it right back up, and have a number of examples of what might fit in there and what that might look like. We could display them, have Carol come here and speak. The other option would be, again, assuming you're not comfortable proceeding here, would be to approve everything except the electronic changeable copy, and then taking that up as a separate issue as a future amendment to the code. If we went that route, we would have to go back to the Planning Commission as a new amendment to the now new code. But, you know, that's an option.
That that might make some sense to, in my mind. Just, I mean, we may end up being in the same point 4 months from now, but I think it's really important that we get, you know, the 99% of this ordinance in place.
I think we should table the electronic portion.
Well, can we table that?
I don't think we
portion?
can do that. We have to pull it out, or we have to.
Yeah, I don't think we can table that. He could make a motion that he essentially, that we approve what the Planning Commission recommended, which was the 2 electronic change copies, paragraphs go out, as well as the combustible sign go out. We've already said that there's no dispute on that.
But would it have to go back to the Planning Commission?
If the city and the OCC decides that they need an electronically changeable sign, you know, to market their programs.
But I don't think it even is just the city, because I mean, now that
You're
now that
saying
the
we-
idea is out there, there would be nothing that would stop any of the churches or the school from coming and saying, we would like you to consider a revision to your ordinance allowing us to do a changeable copy.
Okay.
Because any resident can come to us with anything. If you feel strongly about something and you believe that our ordinance either has something that should be taken out or doesn't have something that should be added to it, you're always welcome to come, and we craft legislation based on that. So, I mean, that would be something that we could say, okay, we're going to approve the signage code the way it is. We're going to completely approve it with the contention that we're not going to allow electronic changeable copy signs. And then at some point, whether it's the city, whether it's somebody else that petitions on their own behalf, but the city would actually write the legislation, we can review this thing again.
If we approve what the Planning Commission recommended, which is deleting any reference to electronically changeable signs, does that mean that electronically changeable signs are illegal?
Yes.
I mean, we're sort of silent on it, aren't we? We just don't address it.
Well, but we do address it in that a sign can only be one of the 4
One of
types.
these,
It's
and
either
if
exempt
if
or
not
it's
on that
temporary.
list, then you can't do it.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right.
So if we got our answers and we wanted to come back and present an electronic sign as an option, it would be an amendment, and it would go in front of the Planning Commission again.
That's correct.
So the only way to table this would be table the entire ordinance. Okay.
No. I think
Well,
you're
yes,
saying.
that is what he said.
Yes.
You could just table the whole thing right
Yeah,
now.
that's
and
the only way to
We could-
table it,
okay.
the whole thing,
Yeah.
is using the term table, right? I'm just verifying, that's fine.
You could do that, or you could,
Well, I'd rather not table it then, because I'd like to pass,
We can't table it. I mean,
I'd rather pass the
we have to.
majority of the signed ordinance, and let's deal with the electronic sign later.
so are you saying you would be in favor of recommending that we approve what the Planning Commission sent to us?
Combustible is allowed,
And that's the only 2 issues, the combustibles and the
We
electronic
can't do
change.
straw polls. I mean.
no,
let's
he's
talk
asking for,
about-
he's asking
Yeah.
for what you were gonna do,
Motion.
blanking.
Yeah, I
A
mean,
motion. He's asking for a
I'm
motion.
looking, we don't have a motion yet, so
Right.
I'm looking for either a motion by Steve, or maybe we need to have Steve make a motion, vote on it, and then if somebody wants to make if it passes, we're done. If it doesn't pass, we could make another motion, I think. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think that would be the way the process would work.
Right.
So since you introduced this thing, in your role as our Planning Commission rep, and you've done an outstanding job, and this is one reason why, you guys do yeoman's work working on the Planning Commission. So I thank you again for your service.
And I totally agree with that. I mean, it's a very difficult issue, and well, I won't say a difficult issue. It's just one that people are very adamant about one way or the other. One thing that I guess hadn't brought up before was that if we pass it the way Planning Commission has recommended, it really only affects one person, and that is the city of Oakwood. We're the only one with a changeable copy sign at this point, so it really only affects us. And as was mentioned, it was kind of a screw up by whether it's the city or by the contractor or whoever did not get the proper permitting. That goes a long way to saying, well, you know, if they're inconvenienced by it, too bad. And as part of the city, I can freely say that. We're not perfect, we make mistakes, and we try to rectify those when they come up. So I'll go ahead and make a motion. Wish I had my glasses, but I will wing it anyway. I will make a motion that we accept the recommendations for the Planning Commission, which is to pass all of the components of the original Title 12 sign ordinance with the provisions Section 1201.06C5, 1201.06D, and 1201.06F2 be removed from the ordinance. And as this is a second reading of the ordinance, I would move that council adopt those recommendations tonight.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion for Vice Mayor Byington?
Can you
So,
repeat?
so to clarify, you are making a motion to agree with the Planning Commission?
No, I will clearly state that I do not agree with the Planning Commission, that I do believe that this is something that we should be considering. But I don't think that we have all the information at this point, and I think that we need to discuss it more, or look at the size, how much information we can put on it,
sure,
and get more feedback from the community as a whole.
Okay.
And I think it's important enough, all the work that has been done on the sign code, to implement this as quickly as possible. I do not want to table this thing for a couple months and have a sign code that doesn't reflect what we're trying to achieve.
You've included the 3 provisions.
Yes.
To take out the 2
Yes.
and agree with the combustible, and we'll discuss it at a later time. I'm just
Yes,
clarifying what I'm
that
voting
if
on. Right.
the electronic changeable copy signs have enough merit, then they can be brought up as a separate issue to Planning Commission and then back to council and pass on their own merits, not as part of the overall signage code. One of the things I always harp on the state about doing is they throw everything into the budget and then they figure, you know what, we're going to pass everything because you can't vote against one thing, and I don't want to do it that way. If there's a specific issue that we need to address, let's address that specifically and not hold up everything else with this one. So that's my motion.
All right.
Chris
I'm
seconded.
clarified. Chris got the second. Thank you.
You did, I thought Ann seconded it. Did
No, it was Chris
second it?
seconded.
I'm
Chris.
sorry, so it's been moved by Vice Mayor Byington to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and seconded by Councilmember Eppley. Do you have a comment before I call for the vote?
I do. Just before you vote, I want to make it clear on the record and for those in the audience, because we've had papers that were handed out to you. You saw the version of the ordinance that was on the lectern on your way in, and then I handed you some additional stuff. The motion that has been put forth would not adopt either of the exhibits that you have in your hands currently. It is what is attached to the ordinance on the lectern. The one that was already attached is what was heard by the Planning Commission, and what council is moving and getting ready to vote on doing would be to adopt that with a direction that city staff delete the provisions that the Planning Commission wanted removed, which are the 2 provisions that put all the electronic sign provisions in there, and the one that has to do with the non-combustible materials. Did I summarize that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
The easy way of saying it is just, we're not going to allow electronic changeable signs, and we're going to allow combustible signs. And then everything else in the sign code, A-okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Everybody ready? All right.
Fire
Lori,
at will.
Lori, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Duncan?
Yes?
Vice Mayor Byington?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mrs. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Epley?
Yes.
Thank you all very much for that. We still have more legislation. This is Vice Mayor Byington has an ordinance regarding a permissive tax.
Yeah, Mr. Popularity today. This one's about assessing a tax to everybody, but hopefully this was one that people will believe in. This is an ordinance to levy a permissive motor vehicles license tax pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 4504.173. Governor DeWine signed the 2019 Transportation Budget Bill on April 10th, 2019. The bill included a provision allowing municipalities to levy a $5, and I'll repeat that, $5 permissive tax on the registration of all motor vehicles, with 100% of that money going to the municipality. The money must be used for authorized purposes, which include the maintenance and repair of public streets. The $5 fee would be collected as part of the annual licensing fee paid each time a motor vehicle is registered to an Oakwood address. That money, projected to be approximately $45,000 per year, would be used to supplement local tax dollars for maintaining our streets. The amount of money provided through the vehicle registration fee was last increased in 2006. Over the past 13 years, this revenue source has not changed, other than the modest variations resulting from minor changes in the number of motor vehicles licensed by Oakwood residents. This additional money will help us to continue maintaining our public roadways in a very first-class manner. This is the first reading of this ordinance, so actually I don't make a motion at this time. We'll discuss it again at our June meeting.
Our June meeting, all right, thank you. That concludes our legislation. We do have our Finance Director here, Cindy Stafford, CPA, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager, Wilbur Klopsch, staff and residents, and you're not going to hurt my feelings if you scoot out, I promise.
This is exciting stuff.
Well, how long?
You didn't say that to us.
How long is it, Cindy?
Well, and actually, there's a few more slides than I usually have.
We cannot let Jackson Stafford talk on the same night any longer.
Well, let's see. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2018 year end, the 2018 financial audit, and year-to-date 2019 financials. And then finally, the big piece of this is our online payment portal, which the Finance Department is very excited about. So I will go through the numbers fairly quickly, and I'm going to flip back and forth between glasses and no glasses, so you'll have to bear with me. The first schedules that I have, or the graphs that I have, are 2018, and when I look at the 2018, we're including in our disbursements encumbrances, and we do that on these particular schedules because when we get to the year end at 2018, we look through every purchase order. We're making sure that the purchase orders that are still left open, that we're adding to the expenses for that year, are actually services that we received. We may have received some item that was ordered, but we have not received the invoice yet. It's a capital project in progress. So that's why if you look at this, you're going to see down here at the bottom, it's going to say disbursements and encumbrances. But when I get to the April 2019, it's only going to be disbursements. This gives us a better representation of actually where we ended the year. If you look at, I've been doing this now, this will be the 11th time that I've presented year-end numbers. And I have to admit, this is probably the closest that we've ever budgeted to actual that I've seen. When we get to receipts, if you look at the general city services includes everything but refuse and the enterprise funds, which are water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater. So if you look at where we ended the year, we were actually at almost 100% of the revenue that we budgeted. That being said, what makes up that number are two biggest pieces. Income taxes ended up being 99.54% of budget, and property taxes were 99.3% of budget. So those being the two biggest Those ones came in to where we budgeted it, so that's why we ended there. General city services, the 95.79% of the budget. One of the things that I do build into the budget every year is when I look at expenses, we may add 3%. When I look at personnel costs, we have people within the city who are at various steps, depending on where they are. Sometimes those steps are at 6-month intervals, sometimes they're annual intervals. So I usually skip them to the next highest step so that I make sure that I cover when I do the budgeting for the personnel costs. And included in the personnel costs would be health, dental, and those kind of estimates. We make those estimates in usually July, August timeframe, and obviously we lock those in and the budget's not approved till December. So the fact that we got within 96% of the budget, I was very happy with how we ended with general city services. The next slide I have is refuse. Again, same thing on this slide. We ended up with 100.65% of revenue to budget. Disbursements and encumbrances were at 96.5%. Again, I'd love to be able to tell you the biggest difference is this, but you're talking $44,000 and $1.2 million, and it's a lot of little different things, so there isn't anything that stands out. When we get to the enterprise funds, which include the water, the sanitary sewer, and the stormwater, receipts are actually 102.32%. The reason there is we had a sanitary sewer rate increase in 2018 that averaged about $13 per resident per month, and so in balancing and coming up with that number, that was the average impact. So I kind of put that out there, and we got close. Came in a little bit higher than we anticipated, about $75,000, the bulk of that being in sanitary sewer. The disbursements and encumbrances are only 87.65%. The biggest reason there is in the stormwater fund. Well, actually, there's two. The stormwater fund, we had budgeted a $250,000 street sweeper, but I think at some point in time, I think Robert was probably the one that showed you the fact that we refurbished a street sweeper, saving the city about $200,000. Kudos to the mechanics at Public Works. So we were able to postpone that expense. So that's the biggest increase in there. So that kind of gets us through 2018 and where we ended 2018. As part of that, what's going on now is the audit of those 2018. The financial audit is the fieldwork has been completed. We have the same CPA firm that we've had the last few years. That's Plattenberg and Associates. They finished their fieldwork. During the course of that, they didn't bring to me anything that they thought was a problem or an issue. So as a result, I'm expecting an unqualified, clean opinion. We should get that audit report. I'm saying 8 weeks. I'm hoping probably closer to 6 weeks. Once they finish, it goes to the state, and the state does a desk review of that before we actually see the final report. So that kind of gets me through 2018. So I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions on 2018. So now I'm moving to where we are year-to-date April 2019. Basically, at this point in time, we should be, if we're following our trend of where we anticipate we should be about 33% of budget. We look first at general city services, and you're going to see the 44% there. That's a result of two things. One being income tax, which is our largest revenue source in general city services. The bulk of our revenue is collected in the month of April and the month of May. This includes April. Income tax at this point in time is about 45% of budget. The other piece of that being property tax. As we all know, we pay property taxes in February and we pay them in July. Those go to the county. The county then turns those, after they go through their whole process of reviewing, calculating, and doing their testing of those numbers. They give us those amounts. The first amount comes in April, and the second amount obviously comes in September. So our current property taxes sit at 55%. That's the reason why at this time of the year we see the 44%. The 27% in disbursements, basically we're just now gearing into the street, the sidewalk programs, those kind of things. So our biggest capital expenditures will start happening, and you'll see the disbursement numbers start to rise. Refuse, oops, sorry. We are at 33%, which is where we would expect to be. The same thing with refuse, we're at 29%. We have several capital expenditures, equipment in this particular case. Those have not been purchased yet, but as we move through the year, we will see those being purchased as well. The water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater, again, we see the 32%, which is where we would expect to be. But if we look at disbursements for the water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater, we're only at 22%. The biggest piece and the biggest reason why is in our sanitary sewer. Basically, 70% of our costs in the sanitary sewer utility are paid by, or are handled by Montgomery County and the city of Dayton. We pay them to handle our wastewater, our sanitary wastewater treatment. They bill us on a quarterly basis, so there's a bit of a timing issue, and that kind of happens every year. So we're always playing catch up. We've spent it, but they haven't billed us yet. So that's why that number always looks a little less every time we look at it. If we keep going in the current trend that we're following, I would say we would finish the year, all of the funds would be within our budget. We don't expect anything unusual at this point in time. We don't see anything. We don't see any trends that we should be concerned about at this point in time. So any questions on the financial side of it? All right. For anybody who has given the city their email address, or whether you have currently signed up for paperless billing, you received in March a letter via email from us basically saying that we were announcing our new web portal, our new web payment portal. And basically the letter said that you could log on to the city's website to get to the link, and that if you were currently mailing your check or bringing cash to us, or we were actually doing an ACH where you have given us your bank account information and we take that money from you when the bills are due at the end of the, utility bills are due at the end of the month. You didn't need to do anything. But for anybody else who wanted to change how they were currently doing it, we are now offering an online web portal. You can find on our website, you will see that online bill pay now. Basically, when you click on that, you are actually leaving our website and you are going to an HTTPS secured website. One of the things you need, if you have not already done that, is on your utility billing invoice, you will find your credit number, or your account number, sorry about that. There are a lot of folks that used to have a 9-digit or potentially a 10-digit number. We refer to those as the old legacy accounts. You would have seen in March on your statement, if you were used to seeing that long number, you would have seen this change. The reason why we made this change is actually these numbers, these account numbers, as we tell people, the new account numbers actually came into existence back in 2009 when we went to our new financial software. However, we had lots of folks who were very attached to their old utility account numbers, believe it or not. So as a result, we left those legacy accounts on there. Unfortunately, when we went to the web portal, we couldn't have both the legacy numbers and the new account numbers, quote unquote new. So we had to switch everybody to the account number. So we have received some phone calls from folks wondering what happened to their old account number. Unfortunately, we had to finally put those to rest, and everybody has now a 5-digit - 3-digit account number. And that's the account number you'll need to actually use the web portal. We went live March 4th. It was a soft opening, and basically if you clicked on the online bill pay, you are now leaving the City of Oakwood's website. You are going to a secured website, and this is what you will see. When you get to this website, you have two choices. You can pretend you're a guest and make a utility payment, an income tax payment, or an other payment, just like you would if you were shopping anywhere else. You don't have to create an account. You don't have to do anything like that. You can just basically pretend you're a guest. The other side would be is to go ahead and sign in or register your utility account. If you choose to sign in and register your account, you would get this screen. And on this screen, I want to caution everybody that if there is a red asterisk next to the box, you have to fill something in. And basically, once you sign in, and you can see down here, we ask you to go paperless. It does save the city, and we are really pushing for everybody to go paperless, to go green with us. So once you do that, then you would move to the next screen, and when you're on the next screen, this is your account at a glance. This particular screen has one open invoice, and they have several closed invoices. This particular account, this individual actually makes payments through ACH, meaning we pull the amount from their bank account. As a result, what you're seeing is nothing under the recent payments, and you won't see any payment history on here. The only way you'll see a payment history is if you actually make your payment through the web portal. What you will see, though, is open or closed invoices. So the only thing open is the current invoice that just went out. And this is if you actually sign up for an account. When you're on here, you have the ability to change whether you want to be paperless. You can do things with regards to send me a text messages, set those text messages so that I can pay my bill if I'm out of town. There are a lot of things that you can do once you're on here. If you go up to the My Account on this particular screen, you will be able to just click right into viewing or paying your invoices, looking at your history again if you made it through the web portal. When you move over and look at the profile section, I want to kind of take you all the way down here to this linked account. We have folks who have, that are landlords in town, and they live here as well. Even if they don't live here, what you can do now is you can actually link all your tenant accounts to yours so that you can see, and you can go on anytime you want to make sure that your tenant is paying their utility bills. Because in the city of Oakwood, at the end of the day, it is the landlord who's ultimately responsible for those water bills. And so rather than us, who we in our office quarterly send out letters, delinquent notices to the landlords, you can now go on here, link your accounts, or even look at the tenant's account number and actually make sure that they've actually paid their bills. And if they have not, you can deal with that as you need to deal with it. One of the nice things on this website is there is a support tab. You can look at videos, there's YouTube things, it's real easy to follow. One of the key things on this is if you call us and you're stuck somewhere on a screen, we have the ability to put your account in and actually look and see where you are in the web portal, the screen that you're on, to kind of move you through that process. So we are always there to help. If you decide you're going to sign on as a one-time guest, what you're going to go to is you're going to see this, you're actually going to see and put in your account number that I showed you on your invoice, your last name. The security code is just in there to make sure that we're not robots at this point in time. You're going to hit the search invoices, and once you hit that search invoice, all of your invoices are going to pop up. But if you look, these two are already paid, this one is open. You can click on it and you can say, add it to my shopping cart, just like if you were shopping at Amazon. It's right there. It also gives you, since you're doing this as a one-time, it'll also bring up another little thing saying, hey, wouldn't you like to register your account? As you move through the process, this now goes to your cart so you can see what's in your cart. And let's say this happens to be June 1st and you know that you've got an income tax estimate coming up, or you have mulch. You can go down to, right down here where it says, I want to find more invoices. If you click on that, what happens is this screen comes back and you can actually click on income tax payments or other payments, and you can pay 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever your invoices are, you can pay them through here. And you can do it all at one time. When you get to the point where you can choose how you're gonna pay, you can choose to pay either by credit card or electronic funds transfer. That's basically a check. In that particular case, you put your bank account number in, not the city pulling that money out of your account. So you can choose when you want to pay and how much you want to pay. Same thing, you can choose how much you want to pay on the invoice. You may decide, hopefully you decide you want to pay the full invoice, but you could pay something less than that. Once you make that choice, two screens will pop up. Either the EFT, and this is the information that you put on for the EFT, or if you choose to pay by credit card, this is the screen that you'll see. Once you put in the information that you want, and in this, well, it is a fee-based program, and for utility payments, it is a flat $2.95, and the max amount of the bill is $300. The $300 was determined because when we looked through, we could tell that most invoices, other than our large commercial customers, are below that $300. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem, but you can make multiple payments. If it is $600, you can do two $300 payments. It is $2.95. That is a flat fee. That is what the utility rules are for us, that it has to be a flat fee amount based on a certain dollar amount. And that's required for utility invoices. When it comes to making income tax and other payments, those are at 2.95% with a minimum of $1.95. And that's if you pay by credit card. If you choose to pay with an electronic check, then it's a flat $2.95 fee. So I can see Mayor Duncan thinking, so if you owed $1,000 in income tax and you pay it, you would pay 2.95% if you used a credit card, but if you paid that with an electronic check, it would only be $2.95. Once you decide and put in and get your information, then you come to your final review screen, just like you were shopping at Amazon. It will also put down below the actual fee. If you have multiple payments, it will figure out what that fee is based on income tax, credit card, however you paid and what you paid. It gives you a total. Once you decide you agree with that, you can go ahead and process that, and you get a little thank you for your payment. You can print this out, but it'll also email this as well to you. This is the screen you'll see if you decide you need to make an income tax payment, whether one time or add-on. And again, our tax administrator has asked, all of this information is mandatory. Please check, double check, make sure you've got your last 4 digits of your Social Security number or your federal ID number in there. It just helps us, if we have a question, it's easier for us to contact you to make sure that we're applying it to the right individual. If you're making an other payment, this is the screen you're going to see. Again, mandatory fill-ins. But you're also going to see this, your choices here on this select one. These are all of the other things that you can pay on here. And basically, we put a miscellaneous in there. And so if there's anything else that we haven't included, you can just call it a miscellaneous payment. As long as we have a phone number and an email address, we can track it down and figure out who it belongs to and where it goes. I put this screen back in here because with a lot of these things, birth certificates, zoning permits, food licenses, a lot of those things have applications and forms that are supposed to go with them. This web portal is just a payment. So you still need to go back to the website, pull those forms down, fill those forms out, and either email them to us, you can drop them off, or you can snail mail them to us. It doesn't matter, but you still do need to fill out those forms. If we get a payment and we wait a couple of days and we don't see the form come through, someone probably in zoning will call you, someone with food licenses, birth or death certificates, they'll call and ask that question. In every screen, or almost every screen, you'll see this. Basically, you can call, this is the utility, this is the finance department. Again, you can also invoice us or email us at the ARinvoices at Oakwood, and we will respond to any and all questions. Any other questions on the web?
Questions?
Yeah, I do. So my original question was going to be, can we involve the OCC in all of their programs on this web portal? You know, but moving away from that is, I'm not sure if I'd want to see this involved with the OCC, because I wouldn't want to charge a resident $2.95 for a $10 or $15 class, for example.
That is, if
So is there any way we can incorporate either this program or have another way to have online registration with payment for OCC events?
I can tell you that, other than charging a fee, this is a since it's a web-based, fee-based program, not through here without a fee. I will tell you that the current system that the OCC is using is expiring. I'm going to use that term. They are going to have to replace that system within the next 2 years. I have been in contact with Carol, and we've had discussions with both Carol and Lori Stanley over at the OCC about what the cost is and starting to plan for where we're going to go, because the current system isn't being supported. I think it's 2 years. And so within 2 years, it has to be replaced. The only type of system that will be available out there will be a web-based with online registration and those kind of things.
Okay.
But it will be fee-based.
It will not be. Theirs will not be. Our ordinances require that the fee is passed on. The utility, by law, the PUC, and Rob can probably help me on this as well. It is a legal requirement for utility.
So PUCO says that you have to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
For utility, and it has to be a flat amount, not a percentage. When it comes to income taxes and many of the others, those are ordinance-based, and we can't, the ordinance doesn't allow us to absorb that fee. And think about it, if you were paying a $10,000 tax bill and somebody used a credit card, potentially most credit card fees are 2.95%. I mean, that's a huge expense to the city that we would be absorbing, which is why most cities, all cities, when it comes to these type of payments, use these type of systems that are fee-based.
Gotcha.
This particular company that we opted to go with is one of the lowest fee-based that we were able to find out there.
Okay, but the OCC project, let's call it, to get online registration with payment will be worked on sooner than later, at the latest 2 years.
Correct. It has to. That system
and we'll need
isn't gonna be
to,
supported.
okay, yeah, that's wonderful. And then we'll need to work on hopefully not having, I'm hoping it wouldn't have large amounts of fees or any service fee to do that, because I would think the lack of paper and all the processing and the time that would be spent would be saved by the online registration.
And
So hopefully,
currently, individuals can call the OCC, they can drop their register, and there's no fee for the credit card when they run it over at the OCC.
Right.
The OCC, what they can't do currently is electronic checks, so payments out of your system. It's either check, credit card, or cash.
right, when they also have to register via paper, correct?
Correct.
I mean, you can't, Yeah, we can't, there's no online sign up and.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Other questions for Cindy? Well, an excellent report as usual.
Yes.
Thank you very much. and
Thank you, Cindy.
We look forward to you meeting with our Budget Review Committee here at the end of this month, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
May 20th.
Thank you. That concludes the staff report. Now do we have a city manager report?
I have nothing this evening, Your Honor.
Nothing. Okay, then we will go to council comments. Councilmember Epley.
Your Honor, I'm going to be following the city manager, and I have nothing to report tonight.
Councilmember Hilton.
No comments this evening, Your Honor.
Councilmember Stevens.
I have to comment on that day in May.
There you
Sorry,
go.
I couldn't get a clean sweep tonight. Yeah,
That's
that
good.
day in May is coming up, Saturday, May 18th. Traditionally, we've got the pancake breakfast, the 5K and 10K run, the silent auction, parade. New this year, there's going to be a dog parade. Theme is going to be superheroes, if I'm not mistaken. So
That's correct.
the Rotarians are asking for residents to dress their dogs up in superhero costumes. Children's games in the afternoon. I believe there might be a dunk booth this
Whoa.
year. I heard there's a
Dunkin' booth?
dunking booth.
Dunkin' booth?
A Bill Duncan booth, yes.
I am a judge for the dog costume.
There you
show,
go.
though.
And then food, lemon shake-ups, Mr. Klopsch?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, lemon shake-ups again. So with a guarantee of nice weather, you'll want a nice, refreshing lemon shake-up. I hope everybody turns out. I've always said for years, I say, besides Friday night in America, Oakwood football games, that day in May is the largest collection of Oakwood residents in our city every year. So it's a wonderful event, even if you don't have younger kids, you know, because it is focused on the younger children in our community. Come by for the pancake breakfast, the silent auction, walk around, talk to neighbors, talk to people during the children's games in the afternoon. The parade is always good.
How's the weather?
The weather's going to be really good this year. I believe all 5 of us will be there in the parade, so we always look forward to that event. That's a nice time. So hopefully you'll come out Saturday, May 18th. It's pretty much a full-day event, and we look forward to seeing everyone there.
Vice Mayor Byington.
Yeah, I'll build on that, just one item, that it is a fantastic community event, but one of the things it also does is it raises money for the Oakwood Rotary Foundation. It's our largest single fundraiser for the year. That money goes towards programs and events and community groups, not only in Oakwood, but throughout the region. Oakwood Rotary does a lot of fantastic things, and by the money that we collect during that event, we're allowed to do a lot of great programs and things for the community. So, yeah, definitely come out for that. I also wanted to say tomorrow is Election Day. However you're going to vote, do that. What I will say is my wife is a election poll worker. I encourage everybody to be very nice to your poll workers. They're doing a very difficult job sometimes, and all they're trying to do is help you to exercise your democratic right to vote. So be nice to your poll workers if you can.
Is she a poll worker in Oakwood?
No, she's actually out in the city of Dayton.
Okay.
So.
I just have 2 items. I want to congratulate the Oakwood School District. U.S. News and World Report ranked the Oakwood High School as the 7th best school of the 736 Ohio public schools they ranked. A particular shout out to junior high 8th grader Alex Zhang, who's earning national attention after performing at Carnegie Hall on April 21st. He's been playing the piano since he was 5 years old. In addition to playing the piano, he plays a clarinet in a school band, loves playing tennis, and enjoys programming. And for the 8th consecutive year, Oakwood High School is celebrating a Division III national title for its academic decathlon team. They've earned the highest team score in Division III national history and outscored 71 other teams from Divisions I, II, III, and IV from across the United States, China, and the United Kingdom. They placed 2nd overall out of 73 teams. I mean, this is just an incredible accomplishment and just an example of how good our schools are. And I'd like to finish with sort of a feel-good story, and it's about Peter Roll. And Peter Roll grew up in Oakwood, Ohio, and went to Oakwood High School. After high school, his parents wanted him to get a job that would include being around people and to help him become more independent. Roll has Down syndrome, and his mom, Chris, didn't think it would be easy for him to find a job. All that changed when Oakwood Goodwill store opened, Chris said. Pete grew up in Oakwood, and that's why we thought about him applying at the Goodwill store there. We told Pete the store was opening and that if he would really like to work there. I stopped in the store and asked the manager how Pete would apply for a job, and she said the same way everyone else does. You go online and you go online and put in your application. That brought me to tears because Pete was treated as an individual and not someone who has a disability. Pete applied and received a call from the manager to come in and interview. Pete thought interviewing was easy, but he did it without any help. I got an interview from Christy, the manager, and then I got the job, all by myself. He was hired right after this interview. I told Christy my strengths are that I am very proud and work hard. My weakness is that I am shy. Asking Pete why she thought being shy was a weakness. Being shy can be a weakness because sometimes I don't speak up, but working here at Goodwill has helped me to speak up, and now I ask lots of questions. Embracing those with disabilities is what Goodwill is all about. It's not just about being with people who have disabilities, it's about supporting and getting Pete out in the community. This could not be a more ideal job for Pete. He looks forward to coming in and never misses a day. In fact, Pete never wants to clock out at the end of the day. It has been such a great experience. He is independent, but if he needs help, it is there for his coworkers and managers. He has built friendships. The transition from school to work has been smooth. I can't say enough, it brings me to tears. This does not happen all the time this easily. This is the way the world should be, said Chris. Pete agrees. I'm very proud working here at Goodwill. I like all my new friends here in the Goodwill store in Oakwood and makes it fun to be here. I also get to see lots of people and friends I know from Oakwood. Pete says he has no intentions in leaving and he wants to work at the Goodwill store forever. So with that, I would indicate that our next meeting is going to be on Monday, June 3rd, 2019, and our meeting this evening is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.